Anastasia Everdeen, until now I have turned a blind eye to your freewheeling antics. I hope someday you will realize your mistakes, do some deep introspection, and be able to correct your attitude towards those around you," Prince Redford said in a calm voice. "Look at yourself, the way you treat me. From the very beginning of our relationship, you haven't looked in my direction." Anastasia was indignant to herself. From the first day Anastasia appeared in the mansion, she was neglected even by the servants. Despite the fact that she was the prince's bride, the man left all this without his attention. Anastasia's fiancé remained cold-blooded in every situation. "Do you really think I'm going to put up with your willful and inappropriate antics forever? I told you, you will never bear the name Radford," the prince went on to say. "But I am your fiancé, and it is precisely the will of the emperor," exclaimed Anastasia. The girl tried not to cry. She knew that as soon as Theodore saw the tears on her face, he would immediately begin to mock her. "Prince, your highness, tragedy!" A servant ran into the room and fell on his knees before Theodore. "It has just been announced that the emperor has passed away." A servant shouted loudly. "Well, look. Just now your last stronghold will crumble." With a smirk, Prince Redford said to the girl. Winter was over, and the first days of spring had come. This time was especially cruel to Anastasia. Because of the wet winds in spring, the girl froze even more than in winter. Anastasia's life had been miserable since her birth. Her father, Jacqueline Everdeen, was an ordinary man with a quiet temper and no outstanding abilities. After losing a power struggle, he was forced out by his own brother. Being of marriageable age, he took as his wife the daughter of a provincial baron, Verita. The girl was born into a poor family, but had a beautiful appearance. Although the couple managed to get a viscountcy, the possessions at their disposal were modest. They were constantly accompanied by poverty. Feeling inferior to his brother's success, Jacqueline hanged himself when his daughter was 14 years old. None of the relatives who attended his funeral shed a tear. "I heard that his daughter discovered the body, and she's only 14 years old. It seems to me that at that age a person is an adult, but it can still be mentally shaken," whispered his cousins at Jacqueline's funeral. Shortly after Jacqueline Everdeen's funeral, it became known that he was heavily indebted. Even if his wife had sold all her property, it would not have been enough to pay off the debt. She was left with nothing more than a title of nobility. A year later, unable to overcome her resentment against her husband, Verita committed suicide, thus turning her daughter Anastasia from the daughter of the Viscount into an orphan. Because of the law forbidding nobles to work, she was constantly accompanied by an agonizing hunger. Anastasia was eager to find the answer to a single question. Why did these trials come her way? Because of the constant cold and hunger, the girl's fingers cracked and her hair lost its former luster. Sometimes Anastasia had no strength and desire to suffer further, but she did not want to end her life by suicide, as her parents had done. One day, a fancy carriage pulled up to a girl's house. It had a coat of arms with 2 swans on it. Anastasia realized it was the Everdeen family's carriage. The Countess Everdeen stepped out of the carriage. "I'm surprised you recognized me. Let me take a look at you. You look just like your mother. You look pretty good. Very thin, of course. One might say skinny, but it will do," said the Countess, and poked Anastasia in the breast with her fan. "What do you allow yourself?" Anastasia exclaimed, and pushed the Countess away from her. "What a cheeky girl, mind your manners," demanded the Countess. "Anastasia, I am going to marry you off," the Countess announced. The Countess's suggestion did not seem so bad to Anastasia. Without thinking long, the girl got into the carriage. Inside, it was decorated with various soft cushions, curtains, artificial monograms. The girl had forgotten when she had ridden in a carriage with such soft padding. "You have come after all," the Count exclaimed, noticing his niece on the threshold of the house. He looked very much like his brother Jacqueline. "Anastasia, tell me, do you know what political factions our empire is divided into?" Maybe you know that there are 3 factions in total? They are the Imperialists, the Catholics, and the Princes. The Everdeen family has always held imperialist views. Catholicism is on the wane, and the aristocracy is too indecisive. You can do whatever you want to them if you need to. The problem is the princes. We have no leverage against them since they come from the imperial court. Prince Redford passed away the other day, thereby transferring power to his son, which in turn means he can now claim his right to the throne. This boy is incredibly greedy, unlike his father. If he tries to team up with the other factions to take the imperial throne, we'll be in big trouble. At least the dead prince knew his place, not like his insolent, cocky son. Anastasia, you have a debt, am I right? I'll take care of it, but in return we'll marry you off. The uncle's proposal was not so bad for Anastasia. He wanted to use her as a barrier between the prince and the throne, in return paying off her father's debt, which was impossible for the girl. Except that even with all the abundance that awaits me there, I doubt I'll be happy in this marriage, Anastasia thought wistfully. I've lived away from the nobility for a long time, but I know what I'm talking about. It's impossible for the young prince not to suspect the intentions of the imperialists. I'll bet he'll hate me. But unfortunately, I have no other choice. I'd rather accept this marriage than go back to that monstrous poverty. Anastasia remembered how she had been freezing cold in the unheated manor. I hear you, I agree. In a firm voice, Anastasia replied to Earl Everdeen. It was several months later that the girl was walking in Prince Redford's garden. So that means you're my fiancé. Nice to meet you, said Prince Redford, walking up to the girl. After the engagement ceremony, Theodore Redford had to engage in social activities. As much as Anastasia didn't like it, she had to accompany her fiancé everywhere. Look, it's the same bride of a famous prince. She may be beautiful, but I hear she's an orphan. An engagement to a prince won't wash away her poverty, whispered those present at the ball. And that's exactly what I like about you. The prince whispered once during the dance. Anastasia wondered what he was talking about, what he meant. I like the fact that you can't fall any lower, replied the girl to the prince. I'm well aware of that myself, the girl said with a smile. Anastasia realized that the prince would no longer play the role of the amorous bridegroom. He made it clear that he no longer intended to hide his disgust for her. Mr. Theodore, do you hate me that much? Anastasia asked. Is there any other way? Though I have not been able to avoid our washing, I'll tell you this. The day will never come when you will bear the Redford name. Angrily whispered the prince, pulling the girl against him. I don't think that's for you to decide, Mr. Theodore, said Anastasia, bowing to the prince. A few days later, a letter with the imperial seal arrived at the prince's address. It demanded that Anastasia be placed in the prince's residence. Do they really want to make our marriage relationship de facto? Damn imperialists! Theodore thought and angrily squeezed the letter. From the window of his study, the prince watched his bride with her valise enter his house. It couldn't be worse, the prince said irritably. Morally, Anastasia was already prepared for the fact that she would not be easy in the mansion of the prince. But contrary to the girl's fears, he was absolutely indifferent to her. A butler came up to the girl and reminded her that the prince would not allow her to leave the house for the garden. Are you suggesting I lock myself in my room and sit there 24 hours a day? The girl asked. Exactly. Without hiding his gloating, remarked the butler to the girl. And he hasn't even bothered to see me even once since I arrived at his mansion. He only gives out instructions through his servants. Anastasia thought irritably. One day, Anastasia decided to get on the prince's nerves. The girl sat down to breakfast near the path on which the prince often walked. She knew that such behavior would make the man mad. Hey, get this out of my garden and out of my sight, ordered the prince to his butler. Anastasia was boycotted by everyone living on the prince's estate. The servants ignored the girl and did not hesitate to discuss her. Think what you want about me. I don't care anymore. Anastasia thought to herself wistfully. She was no longer afraid of alienation or contemptuous glances. Despite the ban, Anastasia still went out to the garden every day. One day, returning from a walk, Anastasia saw the prince in the window of his study. "How is your mood, Mr. Theodore?" the girl shouted joyfully. Without saying a word, Theodore angrily shut the window of his office. "Whenever I look at her, she brings out nothing but disgust in me. I am especially disgusted by her eyes. When I look at them, they remind me of the Earl of Everdeen. What a disgusting woman." The Earl thought to himself irritably. 2 years have passed, and Anastasia's life in the prince's estate has not changed much. Sunday morning, the girl received a letter from the daughter of the Marquis Sorokin. She asked Anastasia to honor her with her presence at the tea party. The Marquis's daughter asked to come in a blue dress. I have no right to refuse her, but unfortunately, I have no blue dress. Sure, I'm given a small sum to maintain some dignity, but it's hardly enough money to at least upgrade my closet a bit. Annoyed, thought the girl. If you also consider the influence of the Marquis' daughter, just showing up in a suitable dress won't be enough. If I behave improperly, I'll be shunned in the world. I think I have one dress I could wear if it was patched up a bit. Its design may be a bit sophisticated, but it's blue and made of quality material. Anastasia reached into her closet to find the dress she needed. "If you're done with cleaning my room, get the tailor in here," ordered Anastasia to her maid. The girl smirked contemptuously. Over the past 2 years, the maids had stopped hiding their hatred for Anastasia. Anastasia knew she wasn't loved in this house, but she hadn't expected the servants to ruin her dress to the point where it could no longer be repaired. "Yes, unlucky you," laughing merrily, the maids exclaimed. "So you're the one who ruined my dress, and you're not even hiding it," Anastasia said in a calm voice. "You must hurry, or you'll be late for your appointment." The maids pretended to be completely unaware of what Anastasia was saying. In the prince's house, even the servants looked down on the girl. Her word was worth nothing. Anastasia ended up going to the reception. She was the only one who didn't wear a blue dress. "You seem to have unyielding tastes, don't you?" Anastasia asked the Marquis' daughter. "Mrs. Sorokina, I am very grateful to you for inviting me to such an exquisite reception. Due to unforeseen circumstances, I was unable to conform to today's dress code," answered that Anastasia. Although it seemed that the issue with the dress had been resolved, Anastasia still heard ridicule throughout the tea party. The whole situation was extremely upsetting for the girl. "I've long since given up hope of being loved. Just being alive is enough for me. Washing my face with cold water in the morning and eating the bland food they serve me here is nothing compared to my life before I came here. The contempt, the humiliation I can take. I don't want to end my life in a noose like my parents." Anastasia returned home late. It was night. All the servants were asleep. The mansion was quiet. Heading down the corridor to her room, Anastasia saw the door ajar. The girl heard a man's voice. The man said that if she had not been an aristocrat, he would have spent another night with her. "What are you talking about? It's a waste of money. Sure, she's pretty in the face, but she's completely empty and cold." Peeking through the ajar door, the girl saw 2 servants. They were preparing the food for tomorrow. "Okay, it's fine, it's nothing. Don't mind what they say, they're just servants. I can handle it too, I'm strong after all." Calming herself, the girl headed to her room. When she entered her room, Anastasia slammed the door shut noisily and leaned back against it. The girl's heart was pounding frantically. She had experienced a tremendous amount of contempt and humiliation today. The girl did not expect that in this house even the servants would hate her fiercely. She understood why the prince did not love her. He had been forced to marry her, but Anastasia was not happy about it either. "I have clothes, food, and a roof over my head. I just have to live. I can't show them my weakness." Like a mantra, the girl repeated to herself, "I must pull myself together. If the prince catches me like this, he'll happily annul the engagement. There's nothing going on. It's fine, I can handle it. Compared to before the engagement, this is nothing." The next day, the servants placed a large dish of spoiled food in front of Anastasia. "Why aren't you eating? Is there something you don't like?" The maid asked Anastasia in an innocent voice. "What, you want me to eat that?" Anastasia inquired of the girl. "Well, don't throw away our food, will you? Don't be a spender, please." The maid objected to her. "You want to hate me then, do you?" Anastasia said in a tired voice and leaned back in her chair. She was tired of being hated not only by Theodore, but also by his servants. Something had to change as soon as possible. It couldn't go on like this. Anastasia picked up a bowl of soup and splashed the contents in the maid's face. "What do you think you're doing?" The maid was indignant. "Well, if you've decided to hate me, at least you'll have something to hate me for," Anastasia muttered. "What's gotten into that crazy woman? Yesterday she was behaving perfectly adequately." The maid thought in amazement. "Listen to me. I'm asking you nicely for now. Quickly bring me a new dish," Anastasia ordered. Why does she suddenly decide to fight back? No one will stand up for her anymore. This is Prince Redford's residence. Everyone hates her. She has no allies here. The maid thought irritably. "And why, may I ask, should I do that? You're the one who threw the bowl of soup. What made you think you were entitled to some special meal?" The maid asked disdainfully. "And if the prince finds out about this, he will be extremely unhappy about it," the maid warned. Anastasia rose silently from her seat and gave the maid a resounding slap. "What do you think you're doing? You scratched my face with your nails. If the prince finds out, you won't get away with it. You'll be without food for days," the maid exclaimed, pressing her hand to her injured cheek. Also silently, Anastasia answered the maid with another slap. Through the ajar door, the second maid watched what was happening. She was afraid that the mistress would beat her friend to death, so she hurried to the prince. The maid fell on her knees in front of Anastasia and began to beg for mercy. The girl had deep scratches on her face, and her nose was broken. Anastasia ordered the maid to leave her room. She wanted to be alone. "I've been patient up until now, and it turns out it was so easy. I should have done it even earlier," Anastasia thought to herself, watching the maid walk away. "I don't give a damn about all this worry. I'm not guilty of anything. I'm sick of being ignored. I don't demand much. I just want a quiet life and to be fed decent food." Anastasia stepped out onto the balcony to breathe in the warm May air. The butler entered the room and said that the prince wished to see the girl. This situation seemed funny to Anastasia. Earlier, Theodore had demanded that she should not even show her face to him, and now he wanted to see her. Entering the prince's study, Anastasia saw Theodore himself and a maid standing modestly. "Are you out of your mind?" Theodore exclaimed angrily as soon as Anastasia entered his office. "I don't understand you. You're asking some strange questions today." With a smile, the girl replied. She wondered how she had managed to keep her sanity in this wild place. "Choose your words when you speak to me. I don't see the slightest remorse in you right now. How dare you call yourself a respectable man after this?" The prince raged. "No, but that's how you look at it. Who else is capable of something like that if not a human?" Continuing to smile, the girl asked, "The maid you beat up has been working here for a long time. You think you can get away with what you did to her? Know your place," the prince said in a calmer voice already. "Know your place, you say? Don't you think it's the maid who doesn't know her place? And if your standards for service are so low, the Redford family itself is in decline. Don't you think so?" Looking into her fiancé's eyes, Anastasia asked, "You yourself were born into an unsightly family, yet you dare to insult mine," Theodore asked, surprised and yet contemptuous. "And what makes your family so wonderful? A man who allows his fiancée to be humiliated is called the head of the family in this house, all because you think I'm here to interfere with your plans. Has it ever occurred to you that you're just a nasty person?" "Watch your words, shameless woman!" the prince exclaimed irritably. Anastasia realized that his self-esteem was his weak point. He lost his temper when he was spoken of contemptuously or dismissively. "Thank God you were orphaned, or I would have personally killed your parents." The prince hissed through his teeth, clenching his hands into fists. Anastasia was always hurt when outsiders brought up her parents. Her fate is not something to be mocked. Her father passed away, leaving his wife and daughter with debts. Her mother did the same. How could anyone be so irresponsible? It is not to say that Anastasia did not have pleasant memories from her childhood. She loved her father very much and was always happy when he came home after he had solved all his affairs. As much as the prince hated Anastasia, there were things he was not allowed to say. Unable to contain her anger any longer, Anastasia slapped the prince across the face. "I don't hate you!" the girl shouted and lunged at Theodore with her fists. The prince managed to grab the girl's arm so she could no longer do him any harm. Anastasia pushed the prince away from her and fled to her room. What kind of man is he? That's so low. He's just taking advantage of my helplessness to take out his anger on me. He wouldn't do that to others. After the incident with the maid, Anastasia was fed much better. All the servants in the house began to treat the girl with caution. The only thing that saddened Anastasia was that she now had to see the prince all the time. The girl did not stop, and almost every day she beat the servants who had previously offended or humiliated her. Every time, after such an incident, the prince came to her to express his indignation. "Do you see that flower? Look at it, please. Do you know what it symbolizes? In the language of flowers, it means an executed woman who is beautiful but cruel." Anastasia once said to the prince, "A stricken servant insulted me, for which she received the appropriate punishment." The girl explained to her fiancé. No matter how much pain Theodore and Anastasia hurt each other with words, they could not change their fate. Although they stood on the same stage, they stood with their backs to each other, and time flowed meaninglessly past them. Anastasia sat at her desk with several invitations from noblemen on it. She didn't like attending balls and similar events, but she couldn't refuse either. "I'd kill them all," the girl whispered, tossing one letter after another off the table. Because Anastasia was the prince's bride, she was often invited to celebrations and festivities. The girl knew that if she went, she would be treated as a stranger, and if she didn't go, there would be unpleasant gossip. No one loved her. She was like a doll abandoned by everyone. The prince did not go to banquets. He referred to the fact that he was busy. Anastasia attended various celebrations and events alone. She often heard the nobles whispering behind her back. They condemned her for her fiancé's refusal to go to receptions with her. Though she has a pretty face, Mr. Theodore seems to care nothing for her. The ladies of the court whispered, "Look, she's staring at us. She's got no dignity whatsoever. It's like they've never heard of parenting in her land." Anastasia decided to go home. No one was waiting for her anyway. But suddenly, she saw Theodore in the crowd. He was chatting nicely with representatives of famous families. "She seems to be alone. I'll try and talk to her." Anastasia heard two young boys discussing her. "Forget about that girl. You don't get into trouble later. And if you're so hungry for beautiful women, I'll introduce you to one. There's a first-class pub just opened up nearby." No longer able to hear gossip and rumors about herself, Anastasia left the ballroom. The girl decided to seclude herself on the balcony. "Lady, is something wrong with you? You look extremely upset." A young man with bright white hair approached Anastasia. "I've never seen this man before. Who is he?" It went through the girl's mind. "Don't be frightened, please," the man said in a soft voice. "Whoever he is, at least it doesn't look like he came here to mock me," Anastasia thought to herself. "Though you ask, how can I not be intimidated? I tell her I don't know you at all," said the girl. "Then at least try not to be afraid of me," the man asked in the same soft voice. "And what do I have to do to stop being afraid of you?" Anastasia asked cheerfully. For the first time in years, a member of the nobility approached her and simply spoke to her. The girl decided not to miss the opportunity. She would definitely make friends with this man. A few minutes later, the blonde-haired man and Anastasia were laughing merrily. They shared funny stories from their lives. "Just please don't make fun of me," the man asked. "No, I would never do that," Anastasia assured him. "You can't lie, can you?" Suddenly the man asked. I've noticed that when a conversation is about a topic that is special to you, your voice starts to shake and you look away from your eyes. From this, I deduce that you have a hard time holding back your real emotions, so you can't hide your deception. Anastasia loved talking to this blonde-haired man. She wanted this moment to last forever. He was the only one who hadn't hated her lately. The man's eyes were honest and devoid of prejudice. Do you hear that tune? It's usually played last. It means the dance will soon be over. Would you care to dance with me? The man held out his hand to Anastasia. But I don't even know your name, Anastasia exclaimed, but still put her palm into the man's hand. My name is Sergey Milbach. The man introduced himself. Theodore froze in place when he saw his fiancée enter the hall under the arm of a blonde-haired man. Sergey, you have a very beautiful name. I like to pronounce it, Anastasia confessed to the man during the dance. I like your smile. It's very radiant. Compliment to compliment, Sergey replied. An annoyed Theodore watched his fiancée twirl in a dance with a strange man. Suddenly, Anastasia stepped on Sergey's foot. I apologize. I just stepped on your foot. I'm so embarrassing, Anastasia said with a smile. I don't know. I didn't feel anything. You're kidding yourself, Sergey answered the girl. You're messing with me right now. I'm a terrible dancer, so I always notice if I step on someone's foot. Even if it does, it doesn't exactly hurt in there, Sergey confessed to the girl. After Anastasia met Sergey, she began to attend balls with great pleasure. When Anastasia saw Sergey, the world in her eyes began to mottle with bright colors. Would you mind socializing on the terrace tonight? Anastasia suggested to Sergey. From that day on, the nobles began to whisper about Theodora. They said that despite all his influence, Prince Redford was unable to control his own bride. It was not the first time that the girl had left him alone and gone off with another man. And it's no wonder she left him alone with that attitude. I'm not surprised at all that she's unfaithful to him, the court ladies whispered. Speaking of fidelity, is that Sergey Milbach by any chance? If I'd known he was so attractive, I would have talked to him myself. But it looks like he's already found his sweetheart. Nowadays, in social circles, it's just me and Mrs. Everdeen with only one favorite. And thank her for giving us the opportunity to see Prince Redford in such an unlikely guise. Still, it's funny to hear Theodore become the object of everyone's ridicule, Anastasia exclaimed. Do you like having unpleasant things said about him? Sergey asked the girl. And I see you're not amused at all. Your master is being ridiculed, isn't he? The girl asked defiantly. And don't try to trick me. All your thoughts are written all over your face, Anastasia said, as Sergey gently put his arm around her. Whatever it is, I still can't get you completely. Sergey sighed heavily. And what makes you so sure of that? Anastasia asked, looking into his eyes. If it were otherwise, I wouldn't be around you. I wouldn't have been allowed to socialize with you, Sergey replied to the girl. Anastasia had been pacing around the room for hours, unable to contain her feelings any longer. She really liked Sergey and wanted to ask him out on a date. The only thing was that she was afraid it would be inappropriate. A maid came into the room. The girl said that a letter had come in Anastasia's name. The letter was from Anastasia's uncle, Count Everdeen. The man was outraged that there were rumors about Anastasia in the world. He ordered her to come to his mansion at once. He didn't even care about me before, but now he's come to his senses. The girl thought to herself irritably. It'll probably be about Sergey. How long has it been since I've been here? Anastasia thought as she stepped out of the carriage. Entering her uncle's office, Anastasia bowed low to him. It's been a long time since we've seen you, said the Count, scrutinizing his niece. Anastasia was angry at her uncle's hypocrisy. The fact was that Count Everdeen had crossed paths with Anastasia several times at balls, but each time he ignored her and didn't even say hello. I see you've grown considerably. Anastasia, tell me, is there something wrong with me? If your life is going well, there must be some limits to your behavior. I don't require you to be friends with the prince. I know he has a rather nasty temper. But it has come to my attention that you have been seeing another man. What the hell are you going to do if the prince demands the engagement be broken off because of this? Why are you acting so recklessly? The count exclaimed irritably. Have I done something wrong? I only communicate with Sergey because he's the only one who sees me as a human being. I won't let anyone take him away from me. This time, I won't give in to my fear. I won't let what's dear to me be taken from me. Anastasia decided firmly to herself. I didn't do anything wrong. Why don't you just tell me to break up with him? And I'll tell you that I'm against it. I have no intention of breaking up with Sergey, and certainly not for Theodore's sake. Why should I do it at all? Anastasia said in a confident voice. Prince Redford does not see me as a human being. He treats me simply abominably. It is different with Sergey, exclaimed Anastasia. The girl could no longer restrain her emotions. Tears spurted from her eyes. Silence! Shouted the count and pounded his fist on the table. Even you, my relative, treat me like a thing. Is the desire to be human for even a moment something terrible? The girl continued to shout. The enraged count grabbed an ashtray from the table and threw it at the girl. The ashtray hit Anastasia's head. Blood splattered on the floor. I will never part with Sergey, and you have no right to demand it of me, Anastasia said firmly, and left the count's study. When Anastasia arrived at her house, she saw Sergey at the gate. The girl threw herself into his arms. Sergey, there's no way I'm breaking up with you, Anastasia promised. I'm of the same mind. In a soft voice, Sergey answered her. Walking to the window of his office, Theodore saw Anastasia gently hugging Sergey. Bloody Everdeens. Those people don't deserve to be happy. It makes me sick to look at her, but I can't take my eyes off her purple hair. Theodore hissed through his teeth. Lately, every day, her ringing laughter echoes within the walls of the mansion. In the 4 years she's been here, she's never laughed like that before, so it's all to Sergey's credit. Theodore thought to himself as he watched Anastasia and Sergey chatting. It's all because she's an Everdeen. If she were a member of another family, I wouldn't be so callous to her. But how can one have compassion for a poor woman who has become a tool for the Earl's goals? Even if it wasn't love, I certainly wouldn't feel hatred. But after all, she's an Everdeen I can't stop hating. The feud with that family started long before I was born. I constantly remember Earl Everdeen's snake eyes. Every time I see those sinister eyes, I feel like I'm being turned inside out. They are a kind of imperial dogs doing his bidding. A few days after my teacher was poisoned, I stood in front of the count who was smiling as if nothing had happened. Theodore later learned that the emperor was responsible for his teacher's death. The man who sent the teacher was never found. Theodore also had no doubt that his father's death was also the work of Count Everdeen. When Theodore looked at Anastasia, he saw the Earl of Everdeen and the Emperor in front of him. This repulsed Theodore from Anastasia. He couldn't accept that someone from the Everdeen family could be a good person. But lately, something had changed in Theodore's soul. When he saw Anastasia's smile, his heart involuntarily flinched. He perceived this sensation as a simple discomfort. Theodore didn't want to think about the reason for the change in him. The last reception of the year was opened at the Imperial Palace. Prince Theodore Redford and his fiancée Mrs. Anastasia Everdeen arrived for the events. As soon as they crossed the threshold of the ballroom, Theodore noticed that Anastasia began to search for Sergey with her eyes. Sergey Milbuck also came to the reception. He could not miss the event, as Anastasia was to attend it. I'm so tired of you already, Theodore thought to himself as he spotted Sergey in the crowd of people. Anastasia wanted to approach Sergey, but the prince clutched her hand tightly, not letting her go. Let go, it hurts, Anastasia whispered. The prince squeezed the girl's hand even tighter and led her to the balcony. What do you allow yourselves today? Anastasia exclaimed as soon as they found themselves on the balcony. Did my behavior at the ball shock her so much? Until now, even the cold attitude in the residence hadn't made her so angry. Is it all because I interfered with their meeting? The prince thought to himself. Maybe it's time you remembered your position by now? The prince hissed angrily. Let go of my arm! It hurts, I say! Anastasia shouted and began to beat her fists into the prince's breast. I won't let you wallow in the mud. Live your life so that you are not noticed by the others. Theodore demanded of his bride. Theodore had said things to Anastasia many times before that he shouldn't have. This time was no exception. You're disgusting to look at, flirting with men like a waitress in a cheap pub. Perhaps Theodore wanted to hurt the girl on purpose. He liked to see the pain on her face. But he didn't take into account the tragic nature of her life, which made her immune to such trifles. Oh, who else is that disgusting to look at? Mr. Theodore, the fall of your reputation was a pure delight to me. I enjoyed seeing you lose the only thing you have, your name, Anastasia said with a smirk on her face. Why on earth would I live my life watching the expression on your face? I've already given up that kind of life. Didn't you know that? And I believe that it is the obstacles that strengthen love. What you want will not happen as it has so far. That's bullshit! Theodore gritted his teeth irritably. Nonsense, you say? Didn't I become your bride even though you didn't want me to? So whether you like it or not, I will bear your name. The girl decided to press the prince's sore spot, his name and reputation. You think I'm going to let you do this? Barely containing his anger, Theodore asked. Of course I think so. And then I will be with my beloved forever, and no one else. I plan, after our wedding, to continue my companionship with Sergey, and you can never prevent me. I hope we are done, and you have nothing more to say to me, said Anastasia, and gave the prince a friendly pat on the shoulder. Entering the ballroom, Anastasia walked over to Sergey and took him under her arm. No one would spoil her tonight. She would socialize and dance with her lover. Is there really another tea party tomorrow? What kind of tea party is it this week? What kind of tea party is it that only Mr. Sergey is on the guest list? And if you're so shy of other people, you should meet in secret. The servants at Prince Redford's residence whispered, Why cover ourselves with these tea parties? Why should we go to all this trouble in this cold? Oh, how I've missed you, Anastasia exclaimed and gently stroked Sergey's face. We just met yesterday. Sergey was surprised. Even if we see you every day, it's not enough for me. I'd like to see you more often, Anastasia said with a flirtatious pout. All right, let's not talk about sad things. Let's have some tea. Let me take care of you. Speaking of which, at the last reception, Prince Redford called me a cheap pub waitress. Can you imagine that? Anastasia asked. Please forgive me, it's all because of me, said Sergey and hugged the girl. You have nothing to apologize for. It is for the prince to apologize. I don't want to hear any words of apology from you. You are sinless to me, Anastasia exclaimed and stroked Sergey's face again. As of late, I've had a dream. I don't want to be the prince's bride. I want to be free. Anastasia squeezed Sergey's hand tightly. I would very much like you to be my bride, Sergey whispered softly. Are you not deceiving me now? How can I believe your words alone? Anastasia asked in a surprised voice. If you don't believe me, I'm willing to swear on my sword, Sergey exclaimed. Where is it seen that a knight swears so easily on a sword? Anastasia wondered. My intention is very deliberate. I'm not throwing words into the wind, Sergey said in a firm voice. If only I could always be together with him, I wouldn't care about all these imperialists and Redfords and the rest. He is my only happiness, Anastasia thought to herself as she gazed into her lover's face. The girl saw a crowd of armed soldiers approach their gazebo. Mr. Sergey, there you are. The prince has organized an urgent meeting. You need to hurry there, said one of the soldiers. I apologize. I have to leave you for a while. You have nothing to worry about. I'll be there soon. Sergey turned to Anastasia. Although Sergey asked the girl not to worry about him, Anastasia still couldn't get rid of the feeling of anxiety inside her. Bloody bastards! Just when I thought they'd quieted down about something, Rami starts a war again! Irritatedly shouted Theodore. The Rami were the name of the people native to the Roma Empire. This empire was devastated by other countries, but did not cease its resistance, even though it was constantly failing. These troublesome lands were given to the princes by the emperor. Prince Redford, trying to live up to his name, meaning rivers of blood. He sought death by fighting in these lands. Defeating Rami's not numerous army was not difficult. It would probably be the same this time. Theodore decided to send Sergey Milbach into battle. Theodore believed that Sergey would return with a victory. Also, while he was away, the gossip about him and Anastasia would die down a bit. At best, Sergey would only be away for a few months. Not that. Refuse. You can't go there, Anastasia exclaimed fearfully after hearing the latest news from Sergey. Don't worry about me. At worst, I'll be here by spring, and I can't refuse the prince. I'm afraid there's nothing I can do about it, said Sergey to the girl. You have my word that I will return to you safe and sound by spring. Sergey kissed Anastasia's fingers gently. A few days later, Sergey left for the war. Anastasia did not go to see him off, but only watched from her bedroom window. Before getting into the carriage, Sergey glanced at Anastasia and gave her a look that let her know everything would be fine. Contrary to expectations, the war dragged on. The winter was coming to an end, but the hostilities did not subside. Sergey was constantly busy and practically did not answer Anastasia's letters. Anastasia's emotional state was getting worse every day. At night, she woke up every hour and started screaming. The girl practically ate nothing. The sight of food made her feel nauseous. To calm down somehow, Anastasia was constantly embroidering. At first, Theodore was in high spirits, but as the war dragged on, his mood gradually declined. Lately, he was also sad and stared out the window. Spring came. Anastasia waited daily for news from Sergey, but there was nothing. One day, Theodore knocked on the girl's room. "Is that you? What do you want?" Anastasia asked in an emotionless voice. "News came from the front. Sergey is dead," Theodore replied to the girl. "No, I don't want to hear it. You're deceiving me," Anastasia whispered fearfully, covering her ears with her hands. "Anastasia, will you listen to me?" shouted Theodore and took the girl's hands away from her ears. "No, I don't want to hear anything from you. Leave my room now. Get out of my sight," screamed Anastasia, trying to break free from the prince's grasp. "Anastasia Everdeen, pull yourself together quickly. Calm down. Take a breath." Theodore tried to shout to the girl again. As she came to her senses, Anastasia noticed Theodore looking at her with an affectionate gaze. "This can't be. Only Sergey is allowed to look at me like that. And why do only misfortunes come to me?" Anastasia thought wistfully. Suddenly, Anastasia rolled her eyes and fell on her back. The girl lost consciousness. There was another nation in the empire that belonged to the same ethnic group as Rami, the Eren. The two nations had never been on friendly terms, but their alliance was the reason for the defeat in this war. The empire only found out about their alliance after Sergey's death. Eventually, after many months, the empire was still able to prevail. The victory did not please Anastasia at all, as Sergey was no longer able to return. The people around her did not know about Anastasia's relationship with Sergey, so she was forbidden to attend the funeral. She was forbidden to attend the funeral, and all she could do was sob, writhing in unbearable pain at the sound of the bells. "Sergey, I wish I had never known you at all. I didn't recognize your honest and trusting eyes. I wish I had never seen your soft and charming smile. Why did we happen to meet you?" Anastasia thought of her lover with pain in her heart. Many months Anastasia spent in her room in unrestrained crying. The girl wanted to visit Sergey's grave, but his relatives refused her several times. When rumors began to circulate among the servants that Anastasia had finally lost her mind, Theodore looked as if he was a bit refreshed. But in reality, somewhere in the back of his mind, pain was gnawing at him. Theodore had not supposed Sergey's death, nor that the news of his death would kill Anastasia. The prince saw her despair daily. Sometimes she appeared in tears in his dreams, but for reasons unknown to himself, in these dreams he embraced her and comforted her. In the dream, the girl scrutinized him with her tear-reddened eyes. Time passed. Winter came again. After a whole year of gradual weight loss and exhaustion, a parcel arrived for Anastasia. It was from Baron Milbach. But why did this package come just now? Anastasia asked her maid in surprise. Opening the package, Anastasia pulled out a white men's shirt. Sergey, you came back to me as promised, Anastasia whispered, clutching her shirt tightly to her. A letter fell out of the breast pocket of his shirt onto the floor. After reading the letter, Anastasia realized that the one she should hate was not the Romians or Arenians, but Theodore. But why did I deserve such a thing? I wish Theodore had killed me. I know exactly why he did it. He wants me to kill myself, so he shattered my last hope. He just won't let me live a human life. Sergey saved me when I didn't want to live or die. He pulled me from the abyss of despair. After meeting him, all I wanted to do was just live, love, and be loved. Staggering from emotional exhaustion, Anastasia finally made it to Theodore's office. She met the butler outside the study. The man said that the prince was not in today. Stand back! I need to talk to him, Anastasia said in a tired voice. You may tell your request to me, and I will convey it to the prince. The butler did not want to let the girl pass under any pretext. He could see that the girl looked mad. The butler was afraid to let her into the prince's office. I told you to get away from that damn door, shouted Anastasia and pushed the butler away. The annoyed girl thundered open the doors of her still fiancé Theodore's office. Mr. Theodore, I would like to ask you something. Why do you hate me so much? Why do I disgust you so much? Suddenly the girl asked. Because you bear the Everdeen name, Theodore admitted. So if I wasn't Everdeen, you'd be nice to me. And you know what I thought. You don't hate me. You hate the fact that the Emperor and the Count made me your bride. Huh, your anger is fake. You're just a coward. And how did you just manage to do something like that? The girl exclaimed and burst into mad laughter. You are a vile and despicable murderer. It was you who killed Sergey. You also morally murdered me. Thanks to you, I learned that a person can die while alive. That doesn't seem fair to me. Why should I be the only one who has to go through this? You must share this fate with me. The girl wiped her tears with her white shirt. Theodore looked closely and noticed black buttons on the shirt. The man realized that the girl was holding Sergey's shirt in her hands. Have you ever fallen in love? Anastasia asked, tilting her head to the side. If so, I'll kill that man. I will poison her, stab her, push her off the roof, bribe the coachman, and cause an accident. I promise you, I will kill her at any cost. So please, Mr. Theodore, fall in love with someone if you haven't already. It's not for nothing they say that love burns brighter when there are obstacles. Anastasia whispered in Theodore's ear and put her palm on his hand. That's exactly what I had. Every time you said something to me, every time my uncle told me off, every time people spoke ill of me, my love only grew stronger. It will surely be the same with you. I ask you again, fall in love with someone, please. Then I will come between you, and the moment your love reaches its peak, I will kill your lover just as you did. For that, I am willing to play any role. How is it possible for a bride to kill her mistress out of jealousy without feeling love for her fiancé? And even if it were possible, I would never win the sympathy of others. That's why I love you, Theodore. From now on, I will love only you. I will love you and hate you at the same time. I will shout loudly that I love you and whisper my hatred only in your ear. Anastasia kept her word. After her conversation with the prince, she literally followed him around. Whenever Theodore met Anastasia's gaze, she immediately smiled at him. It was not clear to those around her what was really in her heart. Theodore was especially startled when Anastasia suddenly began whispering words of love to him. Anastasia often walked with the prince under the arm, so among the nobility there was a rumor that their relationship had improved. Many believed that the girl truly fell in love with Theodore. Anastasia behaved as if Sergey had never existed in her life. And I told you, she's definitely lost her mind this time. Her lover died, and she acts like he didn't exist. Although I heard that knight in shining armor is really a scoundrel. The servants gossiped. Although I could see that he treated Our Lady kindly. And when they were dating, there was at least some peace in this manner. It's not like now, everyone's always on edge. Theodore decided after the war to invite some Romans to serve him. He needed a small army. With the help of these people, he wanted to reduce the crime rate. Laboring even during dinner? Theodore was approached by his faithful butler, Evan. I can't just let the emperor do whatever he wants. I should calculate all my moves ahead of time. The prince answered him. I agree with you, but I still think it's time for you to rest. The butler insisted. Well, since you insist, then distribute the payments and food according to crop yields. And don't forget about the captured lands. I agree with you. It's time for me to rest. The prince finally agreed. Near the door of his bedroom, Theodore ran into Anastasia. The girl was wearing a translucent robe. Theodore, you're staying up late again. And you don't look well, you look tired. And I've been waiting for you. I almost fell asleep myself. Anastasia gently touched Theodore's face. Were you planning on sleeping in my bedroom? Clarified the prince to the girl. Whose else would it be? You and I have been engaged for years, but we still sleep in separate rooms. It sometimes seems to me that you don't care for me at all. Anastasia murmured coquettishly and took the prince under her arm. Looking into the girl's eyes, Theodore realized that it was all an act, and that made him extremely sad. Stop this whole circus, Theodore asked. Sometimes he began to think that the girl had really fallen in love with him, but it was only a deception. She just set her nets successfully. Theodore irritably yanked his arm out of the girl's embrace. If you were an actress, I'm sure the quality of your acting would be unrivaled in the entire empire, said the prince to the girl. Lately, Theodore was less and less aware of how he should behave with this woman. Is that what's really bothering you? Are you doubting my sincerity? Anastasia walked over to Theodore and put her arms around his neck. The girl reached up to kiss the prince on the lips. Startled, Theodore sharply pushed the girl away from him. I'm tired. I need to rest. Theodore answered the girl and slammed his bedroom door in her face. Mr. Theodore, open up to me. I want to see you. I want to talk to you, shouted Anastasia, drumming on the door. I must remember what she said to me then. Theodore reminded himself, leaning his back against the door. Autumn has come. Today, Anastasia received her first invitation to the ball this year. Previously, Anastasia danced at such events only with Sergey. This year, she will dance only with Theodore. She will do anything for revenge. I want to see the anguish on your face, even if you kill me, seized by rage. Only by accomplishing my revenge, and I can finally meet Sergey. Mentally, Anastasia turned to Theodore. The girl took Sergey's shirt in her hands and kissed it tenderly. Every day she wanted to see her lover more and more, but unfortunately it was not destined to come true. Hey, did you inform Mr. Theodore of my desire to have dinner together? Anastasia asked the maid. No, I haven't gotten around to it yet, replied the maid. The girl knew that there was absolutely no point in telling Theodore that Anastasia wanted to have dinner with him. He refused every time anyway. Somehow I feel like you're deceiving me. You probably just ignored my orders, am I right? Anastasia asked suspiciously. I can't take it anymore. If the master refuses next time, she'll just kill me. A beaten maid complained to the butler. Did mistress do this to you? So much trouble from her lately. Her temper is deteriorating day by day. I'll try to talk to the prince about it. The butler promised the girl. I'm already at my limit. Betty and Ketty have already quit, and I'm just going to die here if nothing changes. And remember Emily? She was sent to the kitchen because of her scar on her face. And who left that scar, remember? The maid exclaimed. That woman is completely out of her mind, and the gentleman simply stopped stopping her. You know how much the prince hates that woman yourself, don't you? Just be patient a little longer. He will surely do something about it soon. I'll try to discuss mistress's behavior with him again. Evan tried to reassure the girl. It was true that a lot of people had quit recently. The family's authority could not be allowed to fall, otherwise no one would want to work for the prince, and he would be left without servants. At last, we can catch our breath. Theodore thought to himself, leaning back in his chair. He hadn't been sleeping well lately, as he had been dreaming about Anastasia at night. Sir, I apologize for disturbing you, but this woman wishes to have dinner with you again. I know you asked me not to report this every time, but there is something I would like to discuss with you, said Theodore as Evan entered. Sir, when do you intend to call off the engagement? The butler asked, much to Theodore's surprise. I realize that in this way, you are monitoring the movements of the imperialists and the emperor himself, but her actions are out of line. Already many of the servants have left the mansion. I really hope that this girl really isn't useless. Otherwise, your engagement makes absolutely no sense. I'm also confused by the fact that a couple of years ago, she was openly dating Sergey-san. There are still bad rumors about her. And I don't mention the fact that she beats the servants for any offense. I would very much like to recommend that you call off the engagement. I am well aware that the imperialists will not allow it so easily, but I beg you to heed my advice. I'm beginning to think this woman is poison to the Redford family. He's right about everything. I don't even have anything to say. But for some reason, it annoys me to hear my own thoughts from someone else. Theodore thought to himself. I'll hold off for a while. I think it is too early to call off the engagement, Theodore said without looking at his butler. The Emperor's position is still stable, and Earl Everdeen revels in his power, promising to remain loyal to it. Who else is capable of matching him in influence right now? There is none. If this were an annulment of a normal engagement, we could simply report it and pay compensation. But unfortunately, that is not the case. This woman is now staying at my mansion, which equates our relationship to a de facto marriage. I'll never be able to prove that I had nothing with that woman. Breaking an engagement unilaterally is possible, but marriage is different. We'll have to put up with this woman for a while longer. And by the way, tell that woman I'm willing to have dinner with her. I'm glad I'll be dining with the prince tonight. I've noticed that you don't get it until you're beaten. And tell me I'm not telling the truth. As soon as I barked at you, Mr. Theodore agreed to dine with me. Anastasia exclaimed joyfully. This proves once again that you are completely disobeying my orders. You never give him anything on my behalf, do you? I think you're making a fool of me. If you can only understand the language of violence, how are you better than ordinary animals? A new maid came to Anastasia and began to carefully arrange the hair on her head. She noticed that the maid's eyes were the same color as her mother's. What's your name? Anastasia asked the maid. My name is Alice Smith, the maid admitted. Alice, then. That's a common enough name. Do you have any title? Anastasia inquired. My father is a baron, but unfortunately his title was not inherited by me, narrated Alice. And why do you work as a servant? It's not because of poverty, is it? Anastasia asked again. I have a lot of brothers, so they taught me to live on my own, Alice explained. Anastasia had forgotten the last time she'd had a simple conversation with a person like this. The only time she'd ever had such a casual conversation was with Sergey. Alice, tomorrow be sure to come in the morning and wake me up. I like the way you did my hair, praised the girl Anastasia. So just ignore her. What's the problem? Just pretend to completely ignore her whenever possible. Theodore instructed himself, standing in front of the dining room doors. It's been a long time since we've had dinner together, hasn't it? You're always so busy. You have absolutely no time for me. Anastasia was talking non-stop. Theodore silently ate without paying attention to the girl. Suddenly the girl was silent. Theodore looked at her perplexed. Mr. Theodore, I can't believe you're thinking of another woman right now, Anastasia exclaimed, and tears ran down her cheeks. Is that why you're treating me like this today? You're ignoring your own fiancé. Please make these ridiculous remarks when I'm in the mood to chat with you. I hate to hear you say such things, Theodore said to the girl in a calm voice. It seems to me as if you're deliberately forgetting the most important thing, that I'm the one you should give your first dance to, and I'm your fiancé, whatever you say. the girl said irritably, and picked up her fork. Anastasia jammed her fork with all her might into the piece of meat that lay on her plate. This girl will never love me. Watching Anastasia's actions, the prince thought. This woman's words and actions are extremely deceptive. If this continues, I fear I may lose the ability to distinguish truth from falsehood. Anastasia rose slowly from her seat, walked over to Theodore, and touched his face. I love you, Theodore, Anastasia whispered, looking intently into the man's eyes. I see you are pale. You must not be feeling well today. Well, I'll leave you to continue our dinner next time, said Anastasia and left the dining room. Damn Everdeen. With a sigh, Theodore whispered. Evan came up to Theodore and confessed that he had not yet learned anything about Count Everdeen. The man was under the patronage of the Emperor himself. It was hard to find out anything, especially when it came to the murder of the former prince. But the more dubious the circumstances, the fewer details will come out, won't they? If it wasn't for the Emperor, it would have been impossible in principle. After the assassination, all information related to the case disappeared. Theodore said thoughtfully, It will be very difficult to punish this cunning old man by law, but we can resort to some other method. There are rumors that Earl Everdeen is addicted to illegal substances, Evan told Theodore. He was a reckless man before, and with the death of the previous prince, the situation has only gotten worse. And what substance are we talking about now? Theodore asked. There are rumors that the Count is using asalium. His supply has been steadily increasing over the last few years. This substance is extracted from a plant that has a relaxing effect on the body when used properly, narrated the butler. If we can prove that the Count had something to do with the drugs, he's looking at hard labor at best and the death penalty at worst. Evan finished his story. And how long has the Count been using this substance? Theodore asked. For 6 months. It's not enough. If the Count is just using and not keeping anything in his house, it will be extremely difficult for us to bring him in. We'll have to keep watching him. We just have to be careful that he doesn't notice the surveillance, said Theodore. Bribe the suppliers. Start little by little substituting something else that's highly addictive in place of the asalium leaves. Just make sure the leaves are as similar as possible. In this case, the only danger is that we can't be completely sure that we won't be turned in by the supplier. Theodore and Anastasia arrived at the first ball of the season. I really hope this woman goes down with her Uncle Earl Everdeen. For once, my cherished wish will finally come true. Theodore thought to himself, and cautiously asked for his companion. As promised, Theodore danced his first dance with Anastasia. Theodore, I won't stop telling you that I love you, Anastasia whispered quietly. The Earl of Everdeen was watching the dancers, and he raised his glass to greet the prince. When the dance was over, Anastasia told Theodore that she was feeling a little ill and wanted to go out on the terrace. As soon as Anastasia left, Count Everdeen immediately approached the prince. I have noticed that you and my niece are somewhat estranged from each other. I could influence her as a relative, Earl Everdeen said with a friendly smile. A relative, you say? Quite a bold statement, for a man who isn't even her father. With a smirk on his face, the prince said, However, I treasure her as a daughter. It's just that she's a very shy child. She's still a little shy in relationships. Besides, since such a grief happened to her recently as her guardian, I'm terribly worried about her health. Earl Everdeen continued to play the caring uncle. And what in all of this are you trying to tell me? Theodore asked the Count. He was annoyed that the man had started to bring the dead Sergey into their conversation. Theodore was only now beginning to forget that name. As you know, my niece came into our home as an adult, and therefore was not properly educated. She resembles her mother in her incredible beauty, but that is unfortunately the end of her accomplishments. I don't mean to say she's otherwise terrible, but I still think she could use some manners. Since my residence is not far from yours, I thought I would invite Anastasia to my mansion from time to time. I want to take over her upbringing. You won't deny me that, will you? Theodore silently turned around to leave, but the Count stopped him. For some reason, his offer annoys me and makes me want to refuse, but I have no grounds for refusal. Theodore thought to himself. Do what you want, said Theodore to the prince and hurried away. Theodore had already been looking for Anastasia among the guests present for several minutes. He was tired and anxious to get back to his residence. She's most likely on that very balcony, Theodore thought to himself with an aching heart. When Theodore stepped out onto the balcony, he saw the girl leaning over the railing and looking at something below. The situation looked extremely dangerous. Theodore grabbed the girl's arm and pulled her away from the railing. Were you going to jump off? Exclaimed the prince. Of course not. The girl answered him and released her hand. I just dropped an earring. The girl showed the prince that she had no earring in her left ear. That's it, let's go home. I'm tired, Theodore said in a tired voice. It's unlikely he was worried about me specifically. More likely he was afraid that if his fiancée killed herself at the ball, his name would be defamed. Worrying about someone is unheard of for such an inhuman man. Anastasia analyzed the previous evening. Are you planning to visit the Count at his mansion tomorrow? Asked the girl by her maid Alice. Anastasia answered her that she would definitely go. She was curious what her uncle had in mind this time. You look upset. Did something happen, or is this visit not to your liking? Alice questioned again. I just don't know why exactly I'm being summoned there now. I'm not sure if the occasion will be a joyful one, since I've never been invited to look for something nice, Anastasia admitted. I assure you, this time will be different. And by the time you get back, I'll make a big mug of hot chocolate and keep you company, Alice promised. When Anastasia entered the Count's study besides him, his new mistress was in the room. Suddenly, Anastasia realized that there was a scent of drugs in the room. The girl began to worry that her uncle would make her smoke one cigarette with them. I called you to my room to ask you a piquant question. Have you already stayed the night in the prince's room? The Count asked the girl. You invited me here to talk about this very subject? Without hiding her irritation, Anastasia clarified. You're such an asshole after all. How long do you intend to disappoint me? I can't wait for you to get pregnant. In my eyes, are you a talentless woman who can't seduce a man for years? Irritatedly shouted the Count. Anastasia was hurt to hear such a thing. She might be an orphan without a proper upbringing, but she was still the daughter of an aristocrat. It was humiliating to be naked in front of a man to whom she was not married. From everything I've heard, I've concluded that you perceive me as a prostitute, am I right? Anastasia asked in an emotionless voice. Strange things you're telling me now. And how, tell me, are you different from her? The Earl gritted his teeth. Look, Anastasia, let me dispel your delusions. In our eyes, you are nothing more than an expensive prostitute. The Count bought your body to restrain Prince Redford. The Count's new lover said in a soft, cooing voice. What else do you call a woman who sells her body? I'll never believe you didn't stay the night at the prince's house after living in his house for so many years. Stop playing the innocent maiden. We know how you are. You dated the now-deceased knight Sergey for months, practically in front of your fiancé. Count Everdeen decided to contribute to the conversation. But he and I didn't have the relationship you're talking about now, Anastasia objected. Her heart was again pierced with wild pain, her eyes filled with tears. She was offended that such unworthy people were defaming her lover's name. Why did you only bring him up? There are some things that are simply unacceptable to say. Don't you even know that? Even cruelty must have a limit. The girl shouted desperately. The Count ordered his maids to undress his niece and beat her with whips. This was her punishment for her long tongue. Remember, Anastasia, you are not human. If it weren't for me, where would you be now? Who do you think put you in this place? Shouted the Count. These people really don't take me for a human being. I'll never be able to prove anything to them. Anastasia thought to herself in horror. On the way home, Anastasia couldn't stop crying. Today, she had to experience the greatest humiliation of her life. I will kill him. I will cause him more pain than anyone has ever experienced. I will make him the most miserable person in the world, Anastasia promised herself. Entering the house, Anastasia hurried to her room. She didn't want anyone to see her in such a state. "My lady, welcome back." Anastasia heard Alice's voice behind her. "Is that any way to greet your mistress?" Anastasia asked irritably. "I apologize. It's been busy. I haven't had time to tidy up." The girl mumbled embarrassedly. "I'll pretend I didn't notice anything this time, but be careful from now on," Anastasia said and walked briskly to her room. "You must be tired, ma'am. Would you like me to heat up some chocolate for you?" shouted Anastasia's back and her maid Alice. Anastasia froze in place. She was afraid that if she said even a word, she would definitely cry. "You're going to change, aren't you? I'll wash my hands in a jiffy and help you put on your robe," Alice offered. "I already told you to get off my back. Why are you following me? What do you want from me? Do what you're told without objection." Without holding back her anger, Anastasia shouted, "Please forgive me, but if you need anything, all you have to do is call me," Alice said in a quiet voice and bowed to Anastasia. "Mistress, I have an important message for you from the master," shouted Alice and swung open the door to Anastasia's bedroom. The maid froze on the spot in horror. Before her stood a half-naked Anastasia, her back covered with bruises and deep wounds. "Mistress, what's wrong with your body? How did you get such deep wounds?" Alice asked fearfully. "I'm not going anywhere, and don't ask me to. I won't be able to leave after seeing this," said Alice, entering the room and closing the door behind her. "Was it the Count who did this to you? When you left the house this morning, you didn't even have a scratch on you. How could he do that to you? He's your relative. You don't go through this every time, do you?" Alice asked Anastasia. "Do you really feel sorry for me?" Anastasia inquired skeptically. "Sympathy is the privilege of the nobility over the bourgeoisie. You have no right to feel pity for me." "You are mistaken, my lady. Every person has the right to worry about someone. It is inherent in all people to feel the pain of their neighbor," Alice exclaimed. Bitter tears flowed down the girl's cheeks. "You may find my words too pushy, but in my opinion, you are trying to protect yourself with your rudeness. You keep saying you're fine, but you're not fine in any way," said Alice, helping Anastasia into a tight black dress. "I promise I'll help you change your clothes until your wounds are fully healed." "Madam, unless you've done something irreparable, you're entitled to happiness, no matter how you turn out. You must think I'm some kind of freak, don't you? But from the first time I met you, I really thought you lacked happiness. I sincerely wish it for you." Perhaps if Anastasia had met Alice in some other place, and under other circumstances than at the Count's residence, she might have readily accepted her affection and believed her words. But now, it was hard for her to trust her maid. "You should know how happy I was to hear about the invitation from you, Mr. Theodore." Anastasia portrayed a look of unbelievable joy on her face. "Don't talk nonsense," murmured Theodore. "I don't believe my ears. Did you really answer me this time? Have you finally been reached by my feelings?" the girl asked cheerfully. "This letter came to me today from your uncle." Theodore held out an envelope to the girl. "And why are you giving it to me?" Anastasia wondered. "I just can't understand what your uncle thinks he's doing sending a prostitute to my house," Theodore said in a calm voice. During the conversation, the man didn't raise a glance behind the girl. He didn't want to see her lying eyes. "I'm sorry, what?" Anastasia couldn't believe this whole nightmare was happening to her for real. Anastasia grabbed the letter and began to read it carefully. The Count wrote that his niece had not received proper education due to an accident in her childhood, so he was sending a woman to the prince's house who would share knowledge with Anastasia. A young girl entered Anastasia's room and introduced herself as Janet. She said that she had been sent by Count Everdeen. It was she who was in the Count's study at the time. This girl was Everdeen's new mistress. "I guess you and I will be spending a lot of time together from now on," said Janet, taking off her outer clothing. "Get out of here," Anastasia ordered Janet in a calm and serene voice. "Unfortunately, I can't leave here as I've already taken the money," Janet answered her. "Cut the crap and get out immediately." In an angry but still calm voice, Anastasia repeated her request. Why are you so displeased? I want to assure you that I didn't cost the Count cheap. Not everyone, you know, can afford to pay for my services. If you don't want to regret it later, I strongly advise you not to resist, said Janet. Now I'm going to be humiliated by a prostitute. Anastasia thought to herself in surprise. I told you to get out of here! You're disgusting to look at! Anastasia shouted and swung her arm to hit the girl. Your uncle was right after all. You do lack manners. Janet managed to intercept Anastasia's hand. You think I want to be here? Nothing but a name and a lot of attitude. You've got a lot of arrogance, that's for sure. Janet hissed angrily. Why are you looking at me so angry? Didn't expect to hear such a thing? If it wasn't for the Count's request, I wouldn't be here. And don't expect me to address you in any special way. You and I are even similar in some ways. Listen, mistress, I already got the money anyway. Yes, ignoring the Count won't work for you. So I suggest you don't get worked up and live your life to your heart's content. Anastasia realized that she wasn't going to be able to get rid of Janet, so she ordered Alice to close the door and make sure no one entered the room. Surprisingly, you and I actually have something in common. I love that lovely word pleasure, too. You won't mind if I stretch myself on you for my own pleasure, will you? Anastasia took the candelabra from the shelf and began to gently stroke it. Just a moment, mistress. Are you absolutely not afraid of the Count? Just so you know, I am his favorite, Janet exclaimed fearfully. Anastasia was slowly going mad, but Janet found out about it too late. The girl promised that she would not kill Janet if she fulfilled her request. That day, when Theodore told Anastasia of the Count's letter, she was the first to rise from the table. The prince watched with great pleasure as her face gradually paled, though afterwards he had an unpleasant residue in his soul. Theodore had hoped he wouldn't see the girl for a long time, but after a couple days she came to see him again. Mr. Theodore, I have a favor to ask of you, the girl said with a smile. It seems that none of the Everdeens are familiar with shame, Theodore remarked. I suppose it is, since you say so. Anastasia decided not to argue with him. Despite all the futility, do you want to pull some stupidity again? Theodore asked the girl. Quite right. And I am compelled by circumstances. I think that for you, any action of mine is foolishness, isn't it? Without stopping to smile, Anastasia said, As of late, Theodore began to feel a little strange around the girl. He was even tired of being angry with her. I would like to ask you to have Janet stay in this house for a few days, said Anastasia to the prince. Your request surprises me a little. For some reason I thought you were fine alone, replied the girl to the prince. You're right, but I'd like to have a little time with her. And don't worry, I have no intention of sending her to your bedroom, the girl promised. You are aware, are you not, that because of the cold attitude of everyone in this mansion toward me, I have never had the opportunity to get a decent maid? Anastasia gently touched the prince's ear. So I thought this woman could fill that role. You wouldn't mind, would you? Anastasia asked. It was hard for the prince to argue with her lately, so he agreed without a second thought. The girl kissed him gently on the cheek in gratitude. I never thought a kiss on the cheek could be so disgusting, Anastasia thought to herself as she walked back to her room. But that's okay. You don't have long to live. I will surely find a way to get revenge, not only on you, but on my uncle as well. You will all get what you deserve. Anastasia addressed her abusers in her mind. She had already thought of an insidious plan. The only thing left was to find ways to realize it. A week had already passed since Janet arrived at the prince's residence. Running from Earl Everdean's mansion to Prince Redford's mansion, Janet began spying for Anastasia. Formally, she came to take care of Anastasia's upbringing. Rumors began to spread among the servants that one madwoman had brought another to the house. These people can't stand me, so they discuss my every move, explained Anastasia Janet. Speaking of which, will you, Ellie, not blab about me to the people around you? Asked the girl to her maid. My lady, I wouldn't dare. I swear to you. I know how unfairly you have been treated here before, the maid exclaimed. And you know, Ellie, I sincerely wish a speedy demise not only for Everdeen, but also for Redford. Those two families have doomed me to misery. I have no hope for a brighter future. These people are driving me deeper and deeper into despair. They've made my life a living hell. I can't believe I don't have to do anything. All I have to do is watch and wait for them to destroy themselves. We just need to figure out how to make it so we can destroy them both in one fell swoop, Anastasia said in an angry whisper. Now might be the best time to escalate the conflict between them, Janet suggested. Here I agree with you. Then we'll do what we can to make it happen. Janet, I want you to do something for me. There's nothing difficult about my request. You'll just have to flirt a little. I didn't really think anything more could be demanded of you. You know how much influence Redford and Everdeen have, don't you? I want you to whisper to the Earl about Redford's current state of affairs. Of course, it's unlikely that anyone would listen to the words of a prostitute. But who knows? By the way, did I understand correctly? My uncle takes drugs? Maybe you should try it together with him? Only you should use more serious drugs. I think that under the influence of drugs, my uncle will become more talkative and tell you something interesting. I'm sure he relaxes and lets his guard down around you. Good, Janet replied to the girl, bowing her head low. Although it wasn't Anastasia's plan, her scheme was to Theodore's advantage. He spent a great deal of time reminiscing about the past. These memories were mostly of what Everdeen and the Emperor had taken from him. Theodore vowed revenge on them. Theodore's burning thirst for revenge had the power to bring him back to reality. At least, it had been until recently. For several months in a row, his mind had been filled with completely different thoughts. Theodore often thought about his fiancée Anastasia. Maybe the girl was right and he liked her. Her kisses didn't seem disgusting to him now. He didn't even mind getting to know her better. One of the servants announced that Evan had come to see Theodore. The words brought the prince to his senses. Evan must not guess that Theodore was troubled. He must not know the prince's true feelings for his bride. Calm down. Everything that's going on in my head is just thoughts. There's nothing really wrong with it. I'm unlikely to ever allow myself anything extra. Theodore reassured himself. Have you finished tracking down Earl Everdeen's company yet? Theodore asked in a calm voice. Yeah, they're posing as a regular trading company, replied Evan. I see they have no conscience at all. Why did they suddenly decide to work so openly? Theodore wondered. Their scale is larger than I realized. They openly purchase medicines and fear no one. After researching them, I realized that bribing them or infiltrating them would be a challenge, narrated Evan. And the Count has proved far more vigilant than I anticipated. He often uses pawns that can be disposed of immediately in case of an emergency. Besides, the company itself is based in Everdeen territory. It turns out that if something goes wrong, he can easily cover it all up. This is becoming a problem for us, Theodore said with a heavy sigh. It seems to me that you are in too much of a hurry. The Count won't be able to put pressure on you right away. So what's the rush? Evan asked the prince. I think he's going to start pushing for an official marriage soon. The mere thought of it makes me sick. Plus, I can't stand the thought of him walking under the same sky with me, Theodore explained. Answer me, Evan. Until when do you think I should wait? I'm already engaged to this woman just because I waited for the right time. In that case, how would you feel about us setting up our own trading company and selling the same goods at a lower price? We'll enter the market and wait for the Count's company's turnover to decrease, Evan suggested. At the same time that Anastasia ordered Janet to use drugs, a trading company was set up that kept the Redfords' name secret. Evan was a capable subordinate. He was able to drive Everdeen's company out of the market and increase the scale of Redford's company. While Theodore and Evan were busy preparing various events, Earl Everdeen was already completely mired in his addiction. Although she was born into the lower classes, Janet knew how to present herself in the light. Even though she had to sell her body to satisfy the Earl's dubious hobbies, she was able to gain his support and leniency. Of course, the Count regarded his mistress rather strangely, but still some semblance of trust he felt for her. Janet only pretended to share the Count's fascination with narcotic substances, but in fact, she tried her best to keep her mind sober. She had an errand to run for Anastasia. See, I told you that leaves and seeds have the same effect, Janet said to the Count in a soft voice. In fact, the effect of the seeds was much stronger and quicker. A man would become attached to them in a short time. Janet, look at that! The candle flame looks like a dancing woman. Look, she's completely naked! The Count exclaimed and laughed blissfully. As soon as I'm done here, I'm getting as far away from here as possible. I don't even want to remember all this nightmare. Janet thought sadly to herself as she watched the Count slowly go insane. Summer passed. Golden autumn came. The Count stopped calling Anastasia to him. Really? So now he doesn't even have to be offered drugs, he asks for them? Janet, you did a great job, Anastasia exclaimed. I learned that there was a fire on his lands recently, and he must have gotten caught up in his stupefaction and didn't even notice. Who knows? Maybe he'll blab it somewhere soon, Anastasia said and laughed. The Count was using Redford's drugs without knowing it. The Earl's income was falling every day. The following year saw record rainfall. Chaos reignited in the ungoverned county, and the people of the land turned to flight. In time, even the Count's wife fled from his mansion. Everdeen sought salvation from the Emperor, but he did not lend him a helping hand. Seeing what a cesspool the Earl had fallen into, the Emperor hastened to get rid of him. The Everdeen family was immediately accused of countless crimes. Among them was the murder of the previous prince. For the murder of a member of the imperial family and other offenses, the Count was sentenced to death. Those members of the family who were involved in the deed were executed together with him. The Emperor took pity only on Anastasia. She was not declared an accessory to the Count's crimes. Of all the Everdeen family, she was the only one to escape the death penalty. Looking at the decapitated bodies of her relatives, Anastasia was finally relieved. Now she could laugh heartily and sincerely. The only thing left to do is to get rid of Theodore! The girl set herself to get rid of the hated fiancé as soon as possible. Although the Everdeen family had fallen, Anastasia's attitude to the people around her did not change. She was still considered a prostitute of aristocratic origin, an orphan who had been given a chance to become the prince's bride. People believed that she had achieved everything thanks to her beautiful face. In fact, Anastasia had expected something more from her victory. The fact that only one of her tormentors had died didn't change much. But still, the girl tried to enjoy every day, because there was nothing else to do. While Anastasia was enjoying a temporary pleasure, the prince was experiencing the worst of days. His patience was gradually wearing thin. It was hard for him, as before, to observe his bride dispassionately. As before, he hated her. The prince saw how Anastasia cold-bloodedly meets insult and criticism in her address. On the one hand, it annoyed and surprised Theodore. On the other hand, it spoiled his mood. Sometimes it seemed to him that he felt pity and sympathy for his bride. All this drove Theodore mad. "Isn't it about time you showed a little decorum and backed off?" asked the prince to his bride at another ball. "You know I won't give up on you one step. I have already told you several times that I love you with all my heart." The girl answered him. Stunned by what he heard, the prince pushed his bride away from him. Abruptly turning around, Theodore hurried to get as far away from the hated Anastasia as possible. After this conversation, Theodore never danced with his fiancée at balls again. He asked other girls to dance with him. "I don't really care who exactly you date. I'll ruin any lover of yours," Anastasia thought to herself gloatingly. Anastasia noticed a brunette woman approaching the prince slowly and confidently. This girl was beautiful. "My name is Evelyn Stewart. I admittedly feel awkward proposing to you the first time we meet, but would you mind dancing with me?" said the brunette to the prince. Theodore gladly agreed to the girl's proposal. Anastasia noticed that the brunette had taken a fancy to the prince. This pleased her immensely. At last, Theodore had a lover. When the girl became dear to him, Anastasia would destroy her. "So that's the kind of girl you like." You prefer slender brunettes. Did you think you could take my Sergey and you'd get away with it? That you'd go on living a happy life like nothing happened?" Anastasia gloated. "Mistress Stewart, I would like to invite you to my mansion." The prince offered the girl and was afraid of it himself. He had said it without thinking. It was hard for him to keep himself in control and think straight under Anastasia's gaze. Theodore had hoped the girl would turn him down, but surprisingly she agreed. Anastasia watched as the prince led the brunette to his bedroom. Such a quick turn of events even surprised her a little. "You know, you really helped me out with your invitation. I've been wanting to meet you for a long time, Mr. Prince," Evelyn admitted. "I'm sorry, Mistress Stewart, but that's not why I invited you here," said the girl to the prince. "But I do not regard you as a lover or a sweetheart either. I just wanted to see you, since there has been talk of you since long ago," Evelyn explained to Theodore. Theodore tried to remember if he had interacted with this girl or her family before. He gave the impression that she was familiar to him. Looking into the girl's eyes, Theodore realized that he had seen that look somewhere before. The unusual color of the girl's eyes was familiar to him. "Do you really?" surprised the prince. "Yes, you have understood correctly. Of course, I was curious to get a glimpse of the man my own father abandoned me for." "So you really are the teacher's daughter?" The excited prince jumped up from his seat. Theodore's teacher was a selfless man. As a close friend of his father, he had cared for him and had even given his life for him. Theodore could not believe that the daughter of his esteemed teacher was now sitting in front of him. "I certainly never imagined I'd find myself in your bedroom the first time I met you. I never realized you were such a frivolous man," Evelyn remarked. "You've got it all wrong," the prince exclaimed excitedly. I'm just fooling around. On the contrary, I'm very happy to see you in good health. Imagine how I would feel if I caught the man my father gave his life for in misfortune," Evelyn asked with a laugh. "And tell me, please, how you have lived until now," the prince asked the girl. "My teacher mentioned his daughter at times, but never said anything specific. I remember that he was terribly proud that you looked like him. To be honest, I've been looking for you all these years. I wish you, like your father, would come to my side. You see, at the moment, there is no one around me that I can trust to take revenge on the Emperor. I need an ally I can open up to." Theodore confessed to the girl. "I'm glad you told me all about it. I confess to you that it would have been a shame if you had not known of my existence. However, it is no surprise that you didn't find me. You knew absolutely nothing of my face after all," said Evelyn after the prince's lengthy monologue. "Surprisingly, I grew up in a prosperous environment. I was never raised a day as my father's daughter. I mean, my father's opponents were people who were quite despicable. Because my father was worried about me, he put me in the care of the knights right after I was born. I was sent to the west, where the knights' village was located at the time. You understood that I was sent to the territory owned by the Everdeen family. It was the safest option at the time. There were days when my father was free, and then he would visit me. He would bring with him just a huge amount of presents. In those days, I was the happiest girl in the world. Even though those were only moments in my life, I still remember my father with warmth. After my father died, I was adopted by Baron Stuart's family. They were indebted to him. All this time, I have lived a trouble-free life, so I don't think you have anything to apologize to me for. I have noticed that you feel uncomfortable in my presence. I believe my father did the right thing in giving his life for you, so I don't blame you for his death." With a smile on her face, Evelyn assured the prince. Theodore and Evelyn talked all night. During that time, something resembling friendship had developed between them. "I owe a huge debt to the teacher, so I want to pay it back to you. I promise that I will take care of your future. I swear on my name in front of you," Theodore promised the girl. Anastasia watched her fiancé walk the brunette to the carriage in the early morning. They chatted for some more time in front of their mansion. Did those two really spend the night together? Things are developing much better than I thought. And if I'm lucky, it won't be long before I can get my revenge on the prince. Anastasia rejoiced in her heart. It seems that some girl entered the prince's bedroom yesterday. He's probably having some trouble with his crazy fiancée. I saw him escorting the steward's daughter to the carriage early this morning. The estate's maids were gossiping in the kitchen. I think they spent the night together behind his fiancée's back. Now I was wondering who he would eventually take as his wife. Will the engagement be broken off, and will he throw that crazy woman out of the house? Ellie, you saw her too, didn't you? That woman who came into Mr. Theodore's bedroom? Did you think she was very beautiful too? Anastasia asked her maid. To be honest, I think you're much prettier, replied her mistress Ellie. You flatter me, but I won't torture you with interrogation. I think this girl is very beautiful. At the ball, her beauty filled the whole space. And I believe the prince intends to continue to communicate with her. Anastasia shared her thoughts with the maid. Don't you find it amusing that an engaged man takes a mistress? Though I'm no better myself, having been in touch with Sergey in my time. But on the other hand, it's not as if we don't love each other, and so lovers and mistresses are the best way out for us. For me, the most unpleasant thing in this story is that when I communicated with Sergey, I was condemned by everyone. But I am sure that no one and nothing will say anything to the prince. On the contrary, everyone will take his side and support him. Although Theodore never once confessed his love to Evelyn, Anastasia was adamant that the two were romantically involved. The prince gave Evelyn presents without reason, went with her to see the opera, accompanied her to the ball. Theodore seemed to have forgotten that he was married to Anastasia. Theodore always looked at Evelyn with warmth, while the girl remained calm and cool. Evelyn had always wanted to succeed on her own. She didn't like that the prince had taken her under his wing. She wanted to put an end to it. All she had to do was wait for the right moment. Evelyn learned that the prince had a fiancée. She often saw a sad, red-haired girl at balls. This girl kept her eyes on the prince. "What do you keep looking at?" asked Evelyn the prince. "I'm looking at your fiancée. She seems to be in love with you," Evelyn remarked. "Don't talk nonsense," said Theodore to the girl. "And why did you react like that? Did I embarrass you with my words?" the girl asked cheerfully to the prince. "You shouldn't be dissociating yourself from your fiancée. Look at the eyes she's looking at you with. Her eyes are filled with jealousy. But since you don't want to talk about your fiancé, then let's discuss my future. How do you intend to arrange it?" Evelyn asked the prince. "If you only want to, I can make you mine," replied the girl to the prince. "I thought you were going to say that. Please don't even suggest that I take the Redford name. I have only accepted your kindness until now because I wished to alleviate your guilt. I cannot be with you because I feel a kinship with you," explained Evelyn. "On top of that, I hate the Redford name as much as I hate the Everdynes. If it weren't for your family, my life would have turned out very differently. All the more reason, it seems to me, that you invited me to your house at the time to find out your fiancé's true intentions. You would agree that marriage should be based on love, wouldn't you? For me, a loveless marriage is unacceptable, and I have no feelings for you at the moment. Evelyn, you never cease to amaze me. You are truly an extraordinary girl." The prince marveled. "It's all because you were originally prejudiced against me," Evelyn said, and laughed ringingly again. Evelyn noticed the prince's fiancée watching them throughout the evening. "Mr. Prince, please ignore me for a while, whatever's going on. I want to make sure of something," Evelyn asked Theodore. Since Anastasia could no longer contain her anger, she purposely stepped on the hem of Evelyn's dress at the next ball. "Oh, forgive me! I accidentally stepped on your dress," smiling at the girl, Anastasia said. "Mistress Everdeen, is your apology really sincere?" asked Grandpa Evelyn. Evelyn noticed that the behavior of the prince's fiancée had been strange lately. At balls, she deliberately bumped shoulders with Evelyn, mocked her, tried to tease her constantly. Evelyn concluded that Anastasia wanted to provoke the prince into some kind of action with her behavior. But why would she do that? Evelyn had already noticed that the relationship between the prince and his fiancée was extremely strained. If they hated each other so much, they could just not talk to each other. To be blunt, I didn't see a hint of remorse on your face. You're absolutely no good at lying. It's not cheekiness that counts in lying, it's sincerity. It is sincere people who are excellent liars, said Evelyn to Anastasia. I absolutely cannot understand why this girl is constantly trying to shoulder bump me. I was raised by knights after all, so I have a stronger physique. It's not like she's in pain herself from bumping into me. Evelyn thought to herself perplexedly, this seems like a lame attempt to make a villain out of herself. Does she really think she can hurt me with this behavior? Miss Everdeen, you seem to have trouble seeing. Or maybe you're deliberately choosing not to notice me. Either way, I believe your carelessness is the cause, said Evelyn to Anastasia, after they had once again bumped into each other at the ball. Next time, be more careful, please, asked the girl Evelyn. She wondered why Anastasia was behaving like this. Evelyn set herself the goal of asking the girl about the reasons for her behavior next time. After a while, Evelyn began to feel uncomfortable in Anastasia's presence. The prince's fiancée turned her few allies against her. At balls, Evelyn heard taunts directed at her. Sometimes angry whispers drowned out the musical instruments. Evelyn felt like she was being forcibly drawn into the drama playing out between Anastasia and Theodore. Theodore knew that the nobles had rebelled against Evelyn. He decided to apologize to the girl for that. The prince guessed that his fiancée was behind all this. You have nothing to apologize for, Mr. Prince. I just have one favor to ask of you. Leave me alone for today, Evelyn asked the prince. His ridiculous attempts to help were wearing the girl out even more than the rumors. Then I will not disturb you. The prince answered the girl and returned to the dance hall. The prince's fiancée Anastasia came out onto the balcony. I don't have the energy to bicker with you today, Mistress Everdeen. I don't know why you are using me to try to provoke the prince, but... Evelyn was unable to finish her sentence as Anastasia threw a glass of wine in her face. Evelyn perplexedly froze in place. Forgive me, I accidentally knocked over a glass of wine on you. I didn't mean to do that. My hand just shook, Anastasia said with a look of embarrassment. Evelyn took the glass from Anastasia's hands and tossed it aside. The glass shattered as it hit the concrete. Mistress Everdeen, I don't know what you're trying to accomplish, but someday you'll have to explain it all to me. I still can't understand why you hate me so much, Evelyn whispered in the girl's ear. A rumor reached the prince that there had been an altercation between his fiancée and Evelyn on one of the balconies. Stepping out onto the balcony, the prince saw the girls angrily clawing at each other. Now stop that! Roared the prince. The prince ran to the girls. He drew Evelyn to him with one hand and pushed Anastasia away with the other. Anastasia fell to the floor with a clatter. The girl's back hit the balcony door painfully. Mrs. Stewart, are you all right? Theodore asked excitedly to Evelyn. The prince scrutinized the girl's face to make sure there were no scratches or bruises on it. Prince, did you just push me? Anastasia asked, surprised, rising from the floor. Theodore turned towards his fiancée. He himself was surprised that he had involuntarily pushed the girl. Evelyn was much more important to him at the moment. She was his teacher's daughter, so he felt he had to protect her. Up until now, I've let you do whatever you want just because I was sorry to waste my time on you. But know that you are of absolutely no value to me, said the prince to his bride. Just the thought of sharing the rest of my life with you makes me sick. Mr. Prince, Evelyn said quietly and touched Theodore's arm. No matter how great his hatred for his fiancée, he was not allowed to say such words in public. It could have hit his reputation hard. You make me sick, your vulgarity. I wish you were lying in the grave with your parents. The prince continued to shout. Mr. Redford, how can you say that? What do you mean by that? Evelyn asked, surprised. She had not expected to see the prince in such an unpleasant light. I apologize for my behavior. Are you feeling okay? Are you not hurt? asked Evelyn the prince. Theodore realized that he had gone a little overboard. He needed to be more restrained in public. I'm perfectly fine, as you can see for yourself. But am I really worth worrying about right now? Evelyn asked, with an irritated brow furrowed. Looking at the prince, Evelyn felt disappointed. Had her father sacrificed his life for this man? Before, Evelyn was sure that in gratitude for her father's sacrifice, the prince would always be faithful to the best of humanity. Now Evelyn realized that the prince was not at all the one worth saving. The victim under the circumstances was Anastasia. As upset as Evelyn was, she still allowed the prince to lead her away from the balcony. I feel sorry for her, though. She's a poor girl. The ladies of the court whispered as they looked at Anastasia. Ellie will probably make another fuss when she notices my bruised face. I'm sure the other servants will pop the champagne. Anastasia thought to herself as she looked at her face in the reflection. My lady, what happened to you again? We were letting you go to the ball so beautiful, Ellie exclaimed when she saw Anastasia on the doorstep. Please don't yell. I'm very tired. If you have nowhere to put your extra energy, you'd better help me undress. I want to assure you that even with this face, I feel pretty good, Anastasia assured the girl. I don't understand you. Why are you acting like this? Ellie asked. I haven't been understanding myself very well lately, and it's no wonder, Anastasia replied to the maid. But I'm kind of glad it happened. For once, I'm starting to feel sympathy, so I need to seize the moment. Suddenly, Anastasia staggered. The girl's left leg hurt. She had hit her ankle hard during the fall. It was Mr. Theodore who pushed me. You know he hates me, Anastasia explained to the surprised Ellie. The maid had not expected her mistress to return from the ball maimed. Well, why did the Lord do this to you? It's cruel, Ellie exclaimed. Anastasia remembered Evelyn. She noticed that she was also surprised by the prince's behavior. Maybe she thought that Theodore had overdone it? As he followed Evelyn, Theodore thought about the fact that he had promised himself several times that he would never fight with Anastasia again. Why did he take it out on her every time? I wonder where Anastasia is now. What if she's still on the balcony? Although, what do I care where that woman is now? Theodore thought to himself. Evelyn led the prince into an empty room and closed the door behind her. She needed to have a serious talk with him. Mr. Prince, what are you trying to accomplish? Was it my father who taught you to treat girls so rudely? Evelyn asked angrily with a sidelong glance. Evelyn's words struck Theodore in the heart. The prince turned away from the girl, frightened. He was ashamed of his behavior, though he tried not to show it. Why don't you say anything? Say something already. I really don't want to be disappointed in you, said Evelyn to the prince. You're right. Your father didn't teach me that, Theodore said in a voice full of sadness. He looked down at the floor, ashamed to raise his eyes to the girl. Is that so? What happened on the balcony then? Explain to me. Did you lose your mind? Alwyn asked. You may not believe me, but I'm sane, the prince assured the girl. Then why did you insult your fiancé's parents? And you had no need to push her around. Sure, being doused in wine, the sight of me was awful, but that doesn't elevate me above her, exclaimed Evelyn irritably. You shouldn't have gotten involved in this situation. I could have handled it on my own. Your interference only made it worse. I think you were wrong in this situation. It's all bloody Everdeen. Unable to contain his irritation any longer, Theodore shouted. Evelyn shuddered in surprise. She realized that the problem was not between the prince and his fiancée. It was Anastasia herself. And most likely, it was the prince who was the instigator in this situation. I thought he was harmless, but there he is. I guess I was wrong about him, Evelyn thought wistfully. Your fiancé is a human first and foremost, then an Everdeen. Besides, it's funny to call her Everdeen when the Everdeens themselves got rid of her. Evelyn snickered. Mr. Prince, you have disappointed me today. How did this happen? Sometimes I feel like I've already done something irreparable. Evelyn is right. I need to think about my fiancé once in a while. The prince thought to himself. On arriving at his residence, the prince could not enter the house. He was afraid of encountering Anastasia there. The reason for his doubts was that he did not know what expression he would catch on the face of his bride. With what eyes would the girl look at him after what had happened? Will she smile her fake smile after tonight? Or will her face be permanently weepy, as it was after Sergey's death? I can't figure it out for myself. Am I in an elevated mood now, or a morbid one? The prince thought to himself. Theodore looked up and saw Anastasia standing on the balcony. He hadn't even noticed that he had come to her window. Now that the Everdeens are gone, can she really be called Everdeen? Do I really feel hatred for her? Thought the prince, looking at the girl. "Mr. Theodore, did you check the time well?" Anastasia exclaimed joyfully, finally spotting the prince standing alone beneath her windows. "And why are you asking me this?" the prince asked the girl. Theodore noticed that Anastasia's one cheek was still red. "It's because I think about you all the time. You know, I was a little sad today. I'm your fiancé, and you stood up for another woman in front of the public, and you came home at such a late hour," Anastasia said with a look of embarrassment. "Did you really like that girl that much?" Without a word, the prince turned away from Anastasia and walked toward the main entrance. On the way to his room, Theodore tried to remember when he started to hate Anastasia. For as long as Theodore could remember, he had always been filled with hate. And when he first saw Anastasia, he immediately began to hate her for no reason. He couldn't explain his behavior even now. What was it about him that caused such hatred? At night of the same day, Anastasia appeared to Theodore in a dream. The girl was happy. She was smiling in Sergey's arms. In an instant, Sergey vanished into thin air, and Theodore saw a crying Anastasia in front of him. Since Anastasia had an injured leg, she could not dedicate balls and social receptions. When Anastasia finally arrived at another socialite's party, she saw pity and compassion in the eyes of the court ladies. Just like that, their attitude has changed dramatically? Admittedly, I'm sick of their sympathy, but they hardly dare to put it into words. Anastasia thought to herself as she watched the court ladies from the sidelines. Anastasia was approached by Viscount Brian's daughter, who made her debut this year. "I apologize, Mistress Everdeen, but how would you feel?" asked the girl. Anastasia looked carefully at the Viscount's daughter. This girl was young and inexperienced, so she dared to approach her. Anastasia was not comfortable with this, but she needed supporters at the moment. "Thank you for your concern. I want to assure you that I am perfectly fine," Anastasia replied with a smile. "I'm glad you're doing well. If you have a minute to spare, there's something I'd like to discuss with you. Could you spare some time for me?" asked Anastasia as Evelyn approached. "How can you say such a thing after what you did to her? How can you even speak to Mistress Everdeen?" The Viscount's daughter was indignant. "I believe there's nothing wrong with a quarrel that ended in a truce. You didn't even seem interested in any of this until now, so which one of us is being rude? Doesn't that seem hypocritical to you?" asked Evelyn to the girl. "What did you say your name was? Though why should I care? I never planned to be friends with you." The Viscount's daughter didn't want to be in the same company as the opinionated Evelyn, so she hurriedly excused herself. "Well, she's gone at last. What a tiresome lady. Mrs. Everdeen, follow me. I need to talk to you about something." Evelyn led Anastasia to the terrace. "And I wonder what you want to talk to me about by bringing me to this place?" Anastasia asked the girl. "I'm curious to know how you're feeling. How's your cheek? And how is your ankle?" Evelyn asked, but Anastasia answered her nothing. "You don't want to answer me. I told you that day that eventually you would have to explain everything to me. What are you trying to accomplish? You're using me for some purpose, right?" "I have a right to know what motivates you. I don't want to be used blindly. Tell me everything. Maybe I can help you." She speaks as if she understands me, though she and I are not at all intimate. I feel neither sympathy nor contempt from her. I've never met anyone like that before. I don't know how to behave. Anastasia thought to herself as she stared at the concrete floor. "I've heard your story, and I know you've lived a pretty miserable life. By the way, I realize that you only pretend to be in love with the prince. You don't care who he hangs out with, do you?" Evelyn shared her observations. No, that's absolutely not true, Anastasia replied firmly. And now you are lying to me. You hate the prince. It's easy to read that from your eyes. With a slight smile on her face, Evelyn said, she was glad that her hunch was confirmed. Or maybe you just want to think that, Anastasia asked the girl. I have excellent intuition. I can tell what a man is thinking by the look on his face. I find your relationship with the prince a little peculiar. You know the expression, the eyes are the mirror of the soul, don't you? Evelyn approached Anastasia and grabbed her arm. When a man looks at the object of his affection, his pupils become wider. When he looks at someone he dislikes, his pupils become tiny. Please look into my eyes, Evelyn asked. Anastasia squeezed her eyes tightly shut and turned away from the girl. Okay, don't look at me. I'll tell you your attitude toward me using your pulse. A rapid pulse also indicates non-recognition. Evelyn continued to speak in a calm voice. It's understandable that my pulse will be racing, since I have such a nasty woman like you standing next to me. But I want to assure you that I love Mr. Theodore. Therefore, you cannot like me because you are my fiancé's mistress. Hearing the girl's last words, Evelyn hummed understandingly. Anastasia didn't behave that way because she was a bad person. She was just driven to these conditions. She was like a frightened dog, barking at people to keep them away from her, to keep them from hurting her. Miss Everdeen, why don't you and I become friends? Honestly, it breaks my heart to look at you. You need someone you can lean on, not someone who will feed your hatred, said Evelyn to the girl. If Anastasia had met Evelyn a few years ago, they would probably have become best friends. Evelyn's behavior reminded Anastasia of Sergey. But now it was too late. Anastasia's heart had hardened. She no longer believed or trusted anyone. Are you saying you feel sorry for looking at me? Who the hell are you to act like that to me? Look at you. You have everything. Looks, a prosperous family, and a man who truly likes you, exclaimed Anastasia, grabbing Evelyn by the shoulders. Unlike you, I don't have all that. My life is shaped differently. And just so you know, I sincerely wish you were dead, Anastasia exclaimed. Anyway, I just can't stand you, Anastasia said calmly. She should have continued to play the fool in love. If she killed Evelyn now, she would go to jail. Anastasia wanted revenge without consequences for herself. Well, think of it. Mr. Theodore is my fiancé. I really think he is a wonderful man. I respect him sincerely. I cannot understand why you do not believe in the sincerity of my feelings. Why do you keep trying to come between us? If you feel sorry for me, I beg you to stay away from me from now on. I want nothing to do with my rival. What kind of nonsense are you talking now? Evelyn wondered. If we're done, then I beg your pardon. I have to go, said Anastasia and pushed Evelyn out of her way. Remember, one day you'll be able to count on me, shouted Evelyn into the back of the departing girl. Back in the hall, Anastasia spotted the Viscount's daughter in the crowd of girls. Mrs. Bryan, I apologize for keeping you waiting. I confess it bothered me terribly that our conversation was interrupted, said Anastasia and smiled at the girl. Did you really worry about that? The Viscount's daughter rejoiced. She's so gullible. It's rare to find a person with her soul out in the open in this hypocritical jungle world. I suppose it will be no trouble at all for me to use her, Anastasia thought. Excuse me, do I have something on my face? Your scrutinizing gaze is making me blush, Anastasia asked and touched her face. Not at all. I was merely hoping to inquire about the subject of your conversation with Mistress Evelyn, if that is appropriate, of course, replied the Viscount's daughter. The girl did not know that she had fallen for Anastasia's ruse. Anastasia decided to spread gossip around the capital with the help of the Viscount's daughter. The girl looked upset, tears streaming down her cheeks. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't expect my words to affect you so much. I'm sorry to pry, the Viscount's daughter exclaimed fearfully. A moment later, a group of girls had gathered around Anastasia, listening intently to everything she was telling them. The next day, The whole capital knew that the reason for the unbearable torment of Theodore's bride was his infidelity. Evil tongues were happily maligning the prince's mistress. Some even began to express their displeasure with the prince. But despite all the rumors and gossip, Theodore was still not a step away from Evelyn. The girl, in turn, tried to keep her distance. "Have I become disgusting to you?" Theodore once asked Evelyn. He came to that conclusion just because of one rejected dance? And why that martyred expression on his face like some abandoned child? Evelyn thought to herself contemptuously. I realize, of course, that I'm something of a last hope for him, but increasingly he's becoming a burden to me. Mr. Prince, I want you to finally wake up from your slumber. You need to see the world more soberly. Try not to ask me unnecessary questions so I don't feel embarrassed, Evelyn asked. Evelyn realized that the prince didn't care about her. He only thought he was doing something for the girl's benefit. Whether I am satisfied with it or not, whether I need it or not, the prince is only imposing his sense of duty on me, that's all. But I still want to help him and his fiancée. For that, I am willing to be patient. Evelyn thought to herself. Although they both hurt each other, the instigator is almost always the prince. I doubt very much that he will be able to heal his wounds in this way. If only I could stop his attacks on my fiancée, I'm sure she would stop paying him back. Over time, the ladies of the court accepted Anastasia into their entourage. Their husbands were often unfaithful to them, so they understood Anastasia's heartache. Even those who had previously felt sympathy for her turned away from Evelyn. The girl was hated because of her excessive frankness and directness. Do you really intend to let this kind of treatment of you by Mistress Stewart go unchallenged? Mrs. Lois asked Anastasia in a displeased voice. The girl hated Evelyn because her fiancé had fallen head over heels in love with the Baroness. Look at her, wearing those expensive bracelets! I bet it was a gift from the prince. Mrs. Lois was indignant. Seeing the bracelets on Evelyn's wrists, Anastasia felt not self-interest or envy, but shame for her own bracelet, for which she had long been saving from the money the prince had given her to maintain her dignity. You are his fiancée, aren't you? How did he ever think of choosing Mrs. Stewart? And how do you feel about that? You just have to do something about it. Mistress Stewart needs to be shown her place. Mrs. Lois couldn't stop screaming. Anastasia was amused by the comicality of the situation. The ladies of the court hated Evelyn, but wanted to avenge her by Anastasia's hands. These noble ladies did not want to stain their hands and reputations. I have an idea. I know how you can get Evelyn out of your way, Mrs. Lois whispered conspiratorially. Mrs. Lois called Evelyn's coachman over to her. Well, you and him hang out here, and I'll wait for you by that tree, Mrs. Lois whispered in Anastasia's ear. Listen, I have a favor to ask of you. I want you to give your lady a little scare, said Anastasia to the coachman. The girl took the bracelet off her hand and tossed it to the coachman. When you sell this bracelet, you can buy yourself a small building, or you can start a business somewhere outside the capital. If you don't waste money, you'll have enough for the rest of your life. I need you to ruin one wheel on your mistress's wagon. Just try to make it clear that it was done intentionally. If your mistress gets hurt as a result of the breakage, it will be even better. No one will suspect you, as you will suffer yourself. If everything goes well, you will receive an additional reward. If you refuse or blab, I will personally kill you myself. Think hard about which case has a better chance of staying alive. When the ball was over, the prince escorted Evelyn to her carriage. Anastasia was afraid that Theodore would go with Evelyn. If something happened to her, the prince would not leave her in trouble. Ellie, I tried to kill a man today. You know that Mr. Theodore is extremely cold to me, don't you? Yet he is affectionate with that woman. Every time I see them together, the thought crosses my mind to get rid of it all at once and at once. So, today I had her wagon damaged. I wanted her to have an accident on the way back. I even paid for the job with her coachman with my new bracelet. Anastasia confessed to her maid. Worst case scenario, she could die, you know? That's what I wanted. But for some reason, my feelings are all mixed up right now. I feel like I just want to hate her. When I look at her, I feel like I'm starting to lose my mind. How do you feel about that? I mean, you keep telling me you understand me. It hadn't been long since Ellie had started serving Anastasia, so she didn't know how to behave with her mistress in situations like this. I don't think it will go the way you want it to, mistress. It is rare for anyone to crash to death in a carriage in the capital. I'm afraid you won't do much harm to Mistress Evelyn. Ellie replied, I feel like I've been rushed. I wish it had ended with my death. I don't regret my attempt to kill Evelyn in the slightest. I wanted Theodore to suffer, but I feel like I'm losing something irrevocably. Anastasia thought to herself, do you think I started this conversation because I wanted to hear it? I'm so tired of all this. It can't go on like this any longer. Tell me, Ellie, why do you think I'm doing all this? Anastasia asked irritably. Watching her mistress's mental torment, Ellie could not understand only one thing: why she would not run away from this house. The Count was gone. No one would come after her. Why stay in a house where you are not loved? But of course, these were questions the girl was afraid to ask. Ever since the day Evelyn had started pushing Theodore away, her resemblance to her teacher was undeniable, especially in her tendency to always do the right thing. Theodore was afraid that the girl would eventually reject him. Evelyn forbade Theodore to ride with her in the same carriage. She thought it was wrong. There is no need to be overly concerned about my safety. I am not a target of the Emperor, and Count Everdeen has already passed away. Something tells me that you are not worried about me, but are trying your best to love me. I recall you telling me that you wished to repay my father, but is that how one repays a debt? Everything you do with Mrs. Everdeen in mind. I don't want you to repay me like that. I made the mistake of getting to know you better. I no longer intend to pretend to understand what's on your mind. I should be looking at you from a distance. The closer I get to you, the more I am disappointed in you, Mr. Prince, said Evelyn, and headed for her carriage. I want to give you one piece of advice. Live your life and leave Mistress Everdeen alone. Have you ever felt sorry for her? Theodore thought about Evelyn's words. He had never felt sorry for Anastasia. He thought of her as shackles that the Emperor had put on him. She was a person whose eyes were no different from the Count's, who was just waiting for the moment to humiliate him. Even though Theodore stood by the carriage alone, it still seemed to him that Anastasia was behind him. The next day, in the early hours of the morning, Evan, his butler, entered Theodore's room. He announced that Mrs. Evelyn had had an accident, but that her life was not in danger at the moment. Baron Stewart stated that there is something suspicious about this incident. Hearing the butler's last words, Theodore immediately realized that his fiancée was behind all this. The prince hurried to Anastasia's room. Anastasia Everdeen, it was you, wasn't it? It was you who did something to her wagon, wasn't it? Answer me quickly, Theodore ordered in an angry voice. I don't know what you're talking about right now. Has something happened to Mrs. Stewart? Anastasia asked in a serene voice. Look at her, sitting there like nothing happened, like she doesn't know what happened. There's a reason you have the last name Everdeen, the prince said with a smirk on his face. What made you think what happened was my doing? Could it be that someone else holds a grudge against Mrs. Stewart? Or even you, Mr. Theodore? Either way, it's all your own fault, Anastasia said in the same calm voice. This is the behavior of people who have never been responsible for anything. I think it's time for you to take responsibility for your actions, Theodore said, putting on his thin black gloves. You need to realize that if you're not willing to take responsibility, someone else will take the punishment instead of you. You will be punished instead of your mistress, said Prince Ellie, looking intently into her eyes. Apparently, one ear was damaged as a result of the impact. That area is fairly easy to injure, but it's also chewed up without much trouble, so you have nothing to worry about. Fortunately, the blow wasn't severe, said Anastasia's doctor after examining her maid. Happily? The man was injured. What happiness can there be here? Anastasia asked irritably. That's not what I meant at all. I only meant to say that if nothing festered in the next few days, the wound would soon heal safely. The doctor exclaimed fearfully. Mistress, don't worry, I'm fine, whispered Ellie, lifting herself up on the bed. She didn't want her mistress to worry for nothing. What on earth are you talking about? Look at you! And you're going to try to convince me that you're fine? Anastasia asked, grabbing her maid by the arms. But I know my own body better than anyone else, don't I? My ears are a little ringing, but I can hear clearly. And I'm feeling pretty good, Ellie assured her mistress with a smile on her face. How can you smile at a minute like this? Exclaimed Anastasia. The girl felt ashamed that the maid had gotten it exactly because of her. How could she at this moment look at her with a smile? Why does she remain kind to her? Tell me, mistress, why haven't you escaped yet? There is no one left to bind you as before. And Mr. Prince, he will forget about you the minute you leave his castle. So what's stopping you? Ellie asked. Until now, I looked at you, and it seemed to me that you didn't even know you had the right to choose your own life. As long as you are alive, nothing is impossible for you. Please live your own life. The butler entered the room and announced that Mrs. Stewart had arrived. She is waiting in the reception room. And why on earth would this woman show up here? Anastasia was indignant. I wouldn't advise you to waste your time. Please change your clothes and go out to greet her. Think about who will be responsible for your mistakes, Evans said in a nonchalant voice. As much as Anastasia didn't want to, she still had to change and go down to Evelyn's. Do you have some business with me? Anastasia asked Evelyn. The girl placed the box on the table in front of Anastasia. When Evelyn opened the box, Anastasia saw the bracelet lying in it. And what on earth is this? Are you really planning to bribe me? Anastasia pretended not to recognize her bracelet. That's your thing, isn't it? Evelyn asked the girl. And why are you asking me that? Anastasia decided to stall for time. I know this bracelet belongs to you. Of course, I assumed you would deny it, replied Evelyn to the girl. Huh, I admire you, honestly. Your behavior is that of a model young lady, Anastasia said with a loud laugh. It's amazing. Even a short conversation like this doesn't work out. Even after committing a crime, she continues to hold up magnificently. Evelyn praised the girl mentally. I only came here to return the bracelet to you. I forgive you, but just this once. I know how much hardship you've been through. I know that there are times in people's lives when they are unable to make rational decisions. Anastasia noticed that Evelyn's words really came from her benevolence, not nauseating pity like from other people from the upper classes. Evelyn really is a good person. I have no idea what you're talking about right now, but that's very kind of you. Be that as it may, Anastasia decided to bend her line to the end. You are right. I am a soft-hearted person. I've strived to be like that all my life. But I'm warning you again. Next time I'll do things differently. If anything like this ever happens again, you will be prosecuted according to the law. Please don't lose your humanity. I won't warn you again. I know for a fact that what happened was your fault. I want to advise you to live your life. You have the right to live in better conditions. No matter how I live, you have no right to say something like that to me. With a heavy sigh, Anastasia said. She had heard a similar phrase from her maid Ellie not too long ago. How can they not realize that she didn't choose this life? She's just a victim of circumstances. What can you even understand living your luxurious life? Anastasia asked the girl. What makes you think I live a good life? What do you know about me? Well, I won't blame you for not knowing. I'm a good-natured lady after all, so I'll forgive you that too. Evelyn answered the girl. I really hope that you will soon reconsider your attitude towards me. You've heard it from me, but I'll say it again. You can count on me. Evelyn left, but Anastasia continued to sit in her chair. She replayed the girl's words over and over in her head. Live a better life? Finish you off and be done with it. You know absolutely nothing about me. I sometimes feel like going laundry shopping could cost me my life. How quiet it's been lately gives me the creeps. You never know when that crazy woman's gonna have another seizure. confessed one of the maids. And I keep worrying that she'll suddenly pop out of nowhere and rip all my hair out. It all started when that pretty girl showed up, resented the second. I don't know anymore if these two are fighting for the prince or for their position in society, but I'd rather turn things back to when the prince's fiancée was tailing him. The third maid exclaimed. In all of Redford's residences, down to his servants, Anastasia was regarded with hostility, but things were different in the light. It seemed to everyone that Evelyn was the prince's mistress, so it was not difficult for Anastasia to win the girls to her side. Since rumors spread very quickly, Evelyn was soon isolated from society. The ladies of the court gloated that someone had ruined her carriage. They thought it was Evelyn's fault, because she should behave more modestly. It was finally time for action, and Ellie recovered just in time. I didn't even miss the right moment of coming out, Anastasia thought gloatingly. You know what the most frustrating thing about this situation is? Evelyn thinks I'm the one who ruined her wagon, Anastasia complained to her new friends. Excuse me, I overheard that Mrs. Stewart is going to have her birthday party in the winter. Well, I have no intention of attending. Let her enjoy a celebration that no one came to, said one of the court ladies. My father's doing business with the Baron, so to avoid looking indelicate, I think I'll send her a gift, but I won't participate. A second court lady backed up her friend. Anastasia very rarely left the house in winter. She'd been born in a warmer part of the country, so the local frosts frightened her. Anastasia had to leave the estate because she wanted to buy a present for Evelyn. I never thought you'd buy her a gift. I thought you and her were in a fight, surprised Ellie. That's why I have to get her something. I don't plan on going to the party itself because I don't feel well. I'll get her something useless and joyless. Anastasia decided to give Evelyn a book of some kind. If the cover was decorated with precious stones, the book would be a complete gift. To buy a book decorated with stones, Anastasia had to sell her bracelet. A few days later, the stone-embellished book was delivered to the estate. A few days later, a rumor spread through the capital that Mrs. Stewart was very ill. What on earth are you saying? Does she really look extremely pale lately because of her illness? Maybe she just has chronic fatigue? Anastasia asked in surprise. Indeed, Evelyn's face was lifeless, her hair faded and her skin pale. Anastasia knew that the reason for Evelyn's ill health was her book. Before sending the book to Evelyn, she smeared the edges of it with poison. The funniest thing about the situation was that Anastasia asked Theodore to give her gift to Evelyn. Other than physical fatigue, the poison did not show itself outwardly. It didn't remain in the body of the deceased, making it the perfect choice when it came to murder. No one would ever guess what killed Evelyn. Every day, Evelyn looked worse and worse. She seemed to be suffering from an incurable disease. When Anastasia happened to run into Evelyn at balls, she defiantly ignored the girl, as she saw no point in socializing with her. If Evelyn's body can't handle the poison, she'll be dead in a week. A couple of days after the last ball, Anastasia had already decided to invite Evelyn to visit. The girl wanted to make sure that the poison was still working. Anastasia asked the butler to prepare tea. "How are you?" Anastasia asked Evelyn. "What do you think? If you called me here to mock me, then let's end this quickly. The expression on your face makes me particularly uncomfortable today. I'm feeling nasty, so please don't expect much from me," replied Evelyn. A butler entered the room with a tray. He placed the tea in front of the girls. Having done his job, Evan left the room. "I didn't call you here to mock you or taunt you in any way. I only wish to inform you that Prince Redford is the cause of your suffering and torment. You wouldn't want to die without knowing anything, would you?" Anastasia asked the girl. "You see, I thought there was a misunderstanding between us. Please understand me. I had no intention of killing you," said Anastasia, but it wasn't true. She wanted to get rid of Evelyn once and for all. "I only wanted you to remember, if you should happen to be alive, what sort of man this Redford is. Who cares so much for you?" "Turns out you're the real Everdeen, too," Evelyn said in a voice full of sadness and disappointment. "I really only wanted to help you, didn't I? I didn't hate you, even though I hated you myself. I always thought it was wrong to hate innocent people, Evelyn thought wistfully. I'm not sure I can continue not to dislike you anymore, Evelyn thought to herself, and pulled a small vial from a hidden pocket. Father gave me this before he left, said Evelyn, showing Anastasia the vial. Usually these vials sell Baradin extract. Has she really decided to poison me? Anastasia was frightened. You must admit your mistakes, so I'm giving you one last chance. Do you really want to defeat me so badly? Or do you just want to condemn the prince to torment? Asked Evelyn, walking up to Anastasia. With a sudden movement, Evelyn opened the vial and drank the contents. A moment later, an exhausted Evelyn sank to the floor. Anastasia had wished for Evelyn's death, but she hadn't expected to see it with her own eyes. The maid who entered the room shouted loudly. Evan came running at the scream and noise. When he entered the room, he saw Evelyn dead and Anastasia frightened. A short time later, a doctor diagnosed death by poisoning. Mr. Theodore, I didn't do it, I swear to you, Anastasia exclaimed fearfully. I didn't kill her. She drank the poison herself. I had nothing to do with it. Anastasia gripped the prince's arm tightly. Theodore pulled his hand out and pushed the girl away from him. I can't hear it anymore. Take this woman to the villa and lock her in the attic. Do not let her out until she tells the truth. Ordered the prince to his butler. Anastasia stammered and shouted that it was not her fault, but no one wanted to listen to her. On the prince's orders, Anastasia was locked in the attic of the villa. Are there probably rats in here too? Anastasia thought, looking around. Looking at the view of the attic before her, Anastasia remembered the time in her life when fighting hunger was a daily routine. This room reminded her of the very place that inevitably evoked thoughts of death. Although Anastasia wiped her face, she still felt a visceral sense of death on her. She began to feel as if someone was staring at her back. It was as if God himself were watching her from heaven, seeing her grave sins. What have I done? Even though Evelyn drank the poison on her own, it was I who led her to it. The horror of what was happening began to dawn on Anastasia. How low you have fallen, Everdeen. Anastasia heard Evelyn's voice. Without wanting to, Anastasia has followed the same path as her uncle. The people around her are right. She is the real Everdeen. In an instant, Anastasia was back to her old life. Life in the attic was very harsh. The wind blew continuously from the large window. The conditions in which Anastasia had to cover herself with a piece of cloth and the lack of a bed broke her heart. In this freezing room, Anastasia had no opportunity to wash or change her clothes. Once a day, a modest meal was brought to her. Looks like they don't expect me to walk out of here on my own 2 feet. Though what's so surprising about them wanting me dead? Anastasia thought wistfully. The maids knew that their former mistress was treated extremely badly by the prince. The maids were afraid that eventually Anastasia would die, and they would have to clean up her corpse. In all likelihood, we'll be the first to discover her body. It would have been better if she'd jumped out the window herself. I don't understand why she did it at all. It would have been better if she'd been executed along with her crazy family. The maids sighed. Evelyn's body was carefully placed in a coffin and sent to Baron Stuart's family. Although the Baron tried not to show it, his face twitched with anger. Given Evelyn's health while alive, her death did not come as a surprise to the Baron. Reflecting on the favor Evelyn's father had done him, and what he could gain by her continuing to live, the Baron went to the prince. He could no longer suppress his anger. I suppose it's obvious to everyone that this is murder, said the Baron to the prince. I think so myself, but the villainess herself denies it, Theodore admitted. But everyone knows she's an Everdeen, though. There's no surname in the world with a worse reputation. These people have the blood of the devil himself in them. I would believe the word of some mongrel more than I would believe the word of this woman, Baron Stuart exclaimed. While formal charges have yet to be filed, I have requested an investigation that will reveal details of this woman's crime as soon as possible. I hope you can help me. I beg of you, draw a confession out of her. It will speed up the process. There's no need to be ceremonious with her. This woman has no defense. No one will take her side. I heard you locked her in the attic. For someone like her, light and food and water are unnecessary luxuries. Better lock her in the cellar without food until she confesses. You have every right to go to such measures, don't you? Baron Stuart asked the prince. You want her dead, don't you? Theodore wondered. Right now, I believe she's being fed 3 times a day. I'll have her fed once a day with a small piece of rye bread and water. I doubt she can stand it, after all. She is a noble woman. The prince promised the baron. Theodore invited Evan into his office and asked him how many days Anastasia had spent in the attic already. She's been sitting there for about a week now. The room has gotten quite quiet the last few days, narrated the butler. I suppose that's better than if she'd made a fuss. So what, is she willing to tell the truth? Theodore asked. She doesn't say a word. With a sigh, the butler replied, Well, it can't be helped. Until she confesses, don't open the door to her room for any reason. If she won't confess, then we'll change her diet, said Theodore to his trusty butler. You are all aware, I believe, that the person who committed the murder is in the attic. As such, you are forbidden to give her food and firewood until she confesses, announced the butler to the maids. The girls whispered excitedly. They knew how harsh the winters could be here. It was unlikely that Anastasia would last long. Pardon me, but don't you think that's a bit harsh? The winters in the capital are terribly cold. The attic blows a lot of air, so without proper bedding, Mistress freezes to death up there. Ellie objected. So what of it? The butler didn't get the gist of the problem. On top of that, you want to deprive her of food. I get the impression you just intend to kill her. Ellie was outraged. You are Mr. Redford's maid. How dare you prefer this vulgar woman to him? Exclaimed the butler. He ordered the girl to leave the manor. I'm sure even the prince himself knows the hardships you endured while in his service. Therefore, you will be paid a large sum on your retirement. Mr. Redford doesn't want anyone who isn't loyal to him with all their heart. So get out of here, shouted the butler angrily. Looking at the way Ellie was sent out without a letter of recommendation, the rest of the servants were left to guess from the expressions on the faces of the prince and the butler what was going through their minds. It was extremely problematic to get a new job without a letter of recommendation. In this particularly cold winter in the capital, Anastasia had unknowingly lost her only ally in the prince's residence. The girl was left completely alone. After Ellie left, the rest of the servants stopped even approaching the attic. Absolute silence engulfing the room. In a completely empty room, Anastasia could only stare at the sun outside the window and count the days. No one appeared in the attic, and food was out of the question. Every day, the situation in the attic steadily worsened, and in Anastasia's mind, she kept seeing Theodore's hateful face. The girl felt an unbearable anger inside her. There's no way in hell I'm gonna die here. It's not the first time I've endured this. I endured it then. I'll endure it now, Anastasia promised herself. But there was one thing Anastasia hadn't considered. The winters of the capital were much colder than those she'd experienced in the land of the Everdeens. Her body, which had been in luxury for the past few years, was no longer as strong as it had been. Worst of all, the girl was tormented not only by cold and hunger, but also by fear of impending death and guilt. Anastasia lacked the emotional strength to endure it all. Giving in to the cold, the girl fell into a dream in which her deceased parents appeared to her. Anastasia also saw Sergey in her dreams. He blamed her for giving in to her anger and bitterness and becoming like the Everdeens. No, I'm not like that. I'm not like the Everdeens. I'm different. Swaying from side to side, Anastasia whispered. Although Anastasia had not lived such a long life, but still she had many trials on her way. The girl never complained and always pretended that everything was fine. After sitting in the attic for 5 days without water, Anastasia began to see dead people. They called out to her incessantly. It seemed to her that her dead parents, as well as Evelyn and Sergey, were urging her to part with her life. It was as if they were constantly calling to her from the window. "Let me out of here!" Anastasia screamed furiously, drumming her fists on the door. For the last couple days, it seemed to the girl that a gruesome death was following her around. "Have you repented of what you've done yet?" asked Evan, who had come to the door. "I repent! Just let me out of here!" shouted Anastasia. She felt like Evelyn was always standing behind her. "Well, now that you've repented, are you ready to confess to what you've done?" Evan asked. "The prince said to get a confession from you. It's not so hard to admit your guilt if you're truly remorseful, is it? Are you ready to admit your guilt?" "You're the one who killed me," Anastasia heard Evelyn whisper. "No, I didn't kill her. I told you that several times already. Open the damn door right now!" Anastasia screamed in horror. "That doesn't sound like remorse. I can't let you out." In an emotionless voice, the butler told the girl. Anastasia froze on the spot in horror. She could no longer be here with her ghosts. After sitting in the attic for more than a week without water, Anastasia began to communicate with the dead. They seemed more real to her than the world around her. "What do I put up with all this for? I have no reason to live just as I have no one to love," Anastasia whispered. "But death is scarier than life. Anyway, I don't want to die. I want to live." Anastasia heard the sound of rain outside the window. The girl put out her hands to get at least some rainwater. After drinking rainwater and coming to her senses, Anastasia demanded a trial. "Do you really think that's possible?" Evan, who had come to the attic, asked surprised. "And why not? If you intend to prove my involvement in the crime by such a method, then I have no choice but to convince you of my innocence through due process," replied Anastasia to the butler. "In that case, not only will it be impossible to get a confession out of her, but even restricting her movement will be impossible. She was begging to be released a couple days ago. But what's gotten into her all of a sudden?" Evan thought to himself. After talking to Anastasia, the courtier went to the prince. He wanted to ask him to create even harsher conditions for the girl. Evan planned to lock her in the basement. "This woman demands a trial. Apparently she hasn't realized her situation yet. I thought, why don't we move her to the basement instead of the attic?" said the butler to Theodore. When he heard Evan's words, Theodore imagined a gaunt Anastasia who had survived the winter on bread alone. How long had it been since they'd seen each other? Well, let's do what she asks. Her guilt will become apparent in a court of law anyway. Better to have a formal investigation than let her die in my mansion. I think the evidence of her guilt is abundant," replied the butler to the prince. That same evening, Anastasia was allowed to return to her room. Half asleep, Anastasia didn't notice the absence of her maid Ellie. She focused her attention on writing 2 letters. These letters were a big gamble, but with them Anastasia hoped to win in court. The trial itself was open, which is unusual for a trial involving the aristocracy. This was because many people had taken an interest in the case. As common as adultery was among the nobility, there was still no one who enjoyed it. Murders motivated by jealousy were common. However, this case was notable for the fact that Anastasia refused to admit her guilt. Rumors about the case spread even in the territories of neighboring states. The trial became the object of everyone's attention. All this was to Anastasia's advantage. "I did not kill Mrs. Evelyn Stewart," announced Anastasia loudly at the trial. The girl knew there was nothing against her. Poison was found in Evelyn's body, but no one could prove that Anastasia had planted it. "I did invite Mrs. Stewart into my home, but only to talk. There was a misunderstanding between us, and I hope to resolve it. I admit we didn't get along, but I had no intention of killing her. I just wanted her to end her relationship with Mr. Prince." Bowing her head low, Anastasia said. She tried to put as much pain and despair into her voice as possible. "Besides, Evan the butler was the one who made the tea. I just didn't have a chance to poison Mistress Evelyn." An excited whisper went around the hall. The emperor himself arrived in the courtroom. "Leave your greeting and raise your heads." In a loud voice, the emperor ordered. How come even the emperor himself is here? Theodore wondered. No matter how high-profile the case was, it was hard to imagine the emperor himself taking an interest in nobles. "I can't believe that freedom has caused a mess of this magnitude in the empire. Well, since the problem seems to be out of the ordinary, I intend to take this matter seriously. I will personally pass judgment, the emperor announced. Excited whispers amongst the nobles began again. People whispered that the emperor himself had come to the trial to save Anastasia Everdeen. The emperor began to scrutinize the case file. There is insufficient physical evidence to implicate Anastasia Everdeen in the murder of Evelyn Stewart. However, the Stewart family claims otherwise. Finishing reading the case file in a loud voice, the emperor said, "To confirm the hostility of the relationship between the deceased and the condemned seems difficult to establish. On the contrary, many testify that Anastasia Everdeen wished to establish a relationship. To infer that Anastasia harbored a grudge against Mrs. Stewart because of a mere quarrel is immaterial. Anastasia Everdeen claims that Evelyn Stewart committed suicide, and a comprehensive interrogation showed that she was not lying. And given that Mrs. Stewart was suffering from a terminal illness, suicide is the most plausible version. I, Delius de Igram III, therefore declare Anastasia Everdeen innocent. As compensation for the defamed name, the Stewart family will pay Anastasia Everdeen 500 perunes. If the sum is not paid when due, it will be increased by 30% annually." "But, Your Highness, it is inconceivable that it should be suicide!" In an agitated voice, Baron Stewart shouted. He couldn't bear the very thought of having to pay Anastasia Everdeen such a large sum of money. She would put him in debt for a long time. With eyes full of hatred, Baron Stewart wished Anastasia Everdeen only one thing: a speedy demise. The sum was equal to the Baron's annual income. It shocked not only him, but everyone present in the courtroom. "Baron, you seem unhappy with my decision?" asked the emperor. "No, not satisfied. My daughter went to the best university. Her grades were impeccable. She was so devout that she had no equal. My daughter was fair, moral, and took the creed seriously," exclaimed the Baron. "She's never done anything in her life that wasn't pleasing to God. It's inconceivable that she would do something like this. A bold statement, considering what happened to the Count. And my testimony could seriously damage his reputation." Anastasia thought to herself, "The cause of your daughter's death, as indicated by the autopsy, is Baradin poisoning. However, there is no record of Baradin ever having been in circulation there at the prince's residence," replied the Baron to the emperor. "In my opinion, you're only trying to blame Lady Everdeen for everything. What would you say if the court gave you a chance to read the Baradin nomenclature for yourself?" Baron refused to look at the nomenclature on Baradin. He knew it wouldn't make any difference. The emperor announced the end of the trial and wished everyone a good journey home. "I've won. Is this finally going to be over? At least I managed to get through it all without too much yelling," Anastasia thought with a sigh of relief. The girl was still haunted by her ghosts. She saw them even in the courtroom. It seemed to her that Evelyn was always there, watching everything that happened in the courtroom. Anastasia was approached by the emperor's servant and announced that His Majesty wished to see her. When Anastasia approached the carriage, the coachman, bowing low, opened the door before the girl. "So you are my nephew's fiancée?" the emperor asked the girl. "Yes, Your Majesty." Anastasia bowed before the emperor in a deep curtsy. "Yes, you have a lot of arrogance. You're no better than the Count in your tendency to take advantage of people." The emperor threw the letters sent by the girl out of the carriage and ordered her to pick them up. "So, are you satisfied now? You used the names of your deceased relatives to ask for my help, right? I must admit I was surprised to receive letters signed by people who are no longer alive. Hardly a positive outcome, but in view of their unquestioning loyalty, I will turn a blind eye to the fact that you used their names. Writing me letters to save your life is an extremely brazen act. You know why the Count ended his life this way, don't you? Answer me," ordered the emperor. "Yes, I know. My uncle, using your trust, intended to harm your authority," Anastasia replied. "Never forget that. I never forgive the arrogance of my subjects," the emperor warned the girl. Anastasia knew that the Emperor had saved her because she was his nephew's fiancée. He would not do it next time. But be that as it may, her adventure was successful this time. With the Emperor's help, she was able to survive. Anastasia managed to get even with the one Theodore loved. Now, all she has to do is watch him suffer. I can't even believe the Emperor himself was present at the trial, Evan exclaimed in surprise. Theodore guessed that Anastasia had lured the Emperor to the trial. The girl had found His Majesty's weaknesses after all. Theodore supposed that she might be called innocent because of the lack of physical evidence, but he didn't expect the Emperor himself to save her. Something doesn't add up. Evelyn clearly wasn't the type to die this way. I shouldn't have agreed to the trial after all. Theodore thought to himself, if we had gotten a confession from her before the trial, things would have ended differently. Not only did she not confess to anything, but she got away with it. Evan was indignant. Theodore looked at his butler carefully. Before, he would have been as angry as Evan, but now his feelings for his fiancée had changed. He couldn't explain them, but it clearly wasn't anger. Mr. Prince, we still have time to catch up with her. The longer we wait, the harder it will be. We can't let the moment pass. We need to get her back and punish her for what she has done, Evans said in a worried voice. The Everdeens took much from Theodore at the will of the Emperor. His childhood was completely destroyed. Even the small fragment of the past that he had finally found had been destroyed. It was Anastasia who took Evelyn from him. You know, I sometimes feel like you're trying to control my family more than myself. The butler's words made Theodore extremely angry. He didn't understand why he would bring Anastasia back and take revenge on her when nothing could be changed anyway. The dead would not return. Stop crossing the line. Just do your job. I'm tired and I don't want to hear anything more about that woman. Go away and don't remind me of her anytime soon. Suddenly, a terrible thought struck Evan. His master was in love with his fiancée, so he was behaving like this. Before, his gaze was as sharp as a blade. He was only interested in fighting for the imperial throne for revenge. But now he looked completely different. Theodore sat by the fireplace and thought about what was going on around him. He was troubled by thoughts about his past, about his relationship with his fiancée. He often thought about the dead Evelyn. May I distract you for a moment? Anastasia peeked into the prince's office. It hasn't even been a day since the trial, and you're already acting like nothing ever happened, Theodore said with a chuckle. What's the point of grieving someone who has been proven innocent? The girl asked. I doubt I'm willing to believe you're innocent. I believe that Mrs. Stewart's illness is your doing, Theodore replied. And I think you're just trying to convince yourself of that. Anastasia stepped closer to Theodore. What are you saying? It seems to me that the Everdeen clan is all about doing something mean. I kept silent this time due to lack of evidence, but I still remember the words you said. You promised to kill someone I liked. So what have you decided now? Are you going to kill me for lack of evidence? You've already left me without firewood, water, or food this winter. What more do you want? Anastasia asked. What are you talking about now? Theodore wondered. Why do you pretend you don't know anything about this? Because everything Evan does, he does based on what you say. Look at me. Anastasia looked carefully into Theodore's eyes. Can't you see that my skin is chapped and my body is severely gaunt? Physically, I still haven't shipped from this winter. Have you noticed that my voice has also changed? Every breath I take resembles a metallic scraping sound. And that's what you did to me. Or will you deny it? Theodore wanted to object to the girl that his butler was acting out of personal motives, but remembered that Evan's actions had always been dictated by his loyalty. Theodore kept Evan by his side precisely because he liked the butler to do things outside of his orders. Don't ever touch me again. I don't like it. Theodore decided to change the topic of conversation. Ignoring the prince's words, Anastasia leaned over him and kissed him on the lips. Theodore wanted to push the girl away, but he couldn't. Realizing that his feelings were beginning to overwhelm him, Theodore still pulled the girl away from him. Too bad you stopped our passionate kiss. I really wanted to bite your tongue off. You always say things that make me want to kill, Anastasia said with a smirk. And if I told you that I killed your dear Evelyn, how would you act? The girl asked. Since you say you remember my words, you should have acted a little more decisively. Then again, you took Sergey away from me first. Therefore, I can take away your favorite person as well. Don't you think that's fair? At that moment, Theodore finally noticed how crazy Anastasia had become. The girl who a few years ago was just a nasty 16-year-old girl was now completely insane. Perhaps he was the cause of her madness. You're wrong. Evelyn and I were not lovers. I had no romantic feelings for her, Theodore admitted. That's not true. You're lying to me, Anastasia exclaimed. It seemed to the girl that something inside her was torn. Looking into the prince's eyes, she realized that he was telling the truth. Anastasia ran out of the office without another word. She was overwhelmed with guilt. Running into her room, Anastasia fell to the floor. The girl felt like her room was filled with ghosts. You've already realized he's telling the truth, haven't you? What are you going to do now? Why didn't you realize before that there was nothing between us? Did you notice the love in Theodore's eyes when he looked at me? Evelyn's ghost asked. Anastasia remembered Sergey. Theodore had never looked at either Anastasia or Evelyn with such loving eyes as Sergey did. Anastasia, you stink of death. Could it be that this is the cause of your misfortunes that forever follows you around? Screaming loudly, Anastasia clamped her hands over her ears. She didn't want to hear the ghosts whispering anymore. They should leave her alone. Looking up, Anastasia saw a vase of flowers. She took the vase from the table and threw it at Evelyn's ghost. It immediately shattered into small pieces. Anastasia called loudly to her maid, Ellie. At the moment, she needed someone who would listen to her and support her. Mistress, did you call for me? Asked the maid who entered, but it wasn't Ellie. Why did you come? I didn't call you. Anastasia was indignant. The second the girl realized that Ellie was no longer in the residence, she had left the grounds of the mansion without her knowledge. Anastasia's nervous system could no longer cope with her raging emotions, so the girl fainted. Anastasia regained consciousness only a few days later. She had been in a deep sleep all this time. She hoped that when she opened her eyes, she would see Ellie smiling at her side. A dark-haired girl, unknown to her, stood next to Anastasia's bed. The miracle didn't happen. Ellie didn't show up. All the inhabitants of the residence were busy preparing for their return to the feudal lands. Anastasia, on the other hand, was simply adrift. She never returned to her usual state. Everything around her terrified her. I told you to get that damn mirror out of my room! Anastasia screamed. She was beginning to realize that she was slowly losing her mind. The girl began to see Sergey's head rolling around more and more often. Her parents also appeared before her eyes, swinging from side to side like swings. It seemed to the girl that her hands were covered in blood, and it was impossible to wash away that blood. Seeing her washing and washing her hands constantly, the servants in the mansion started spreading rumors about her insanity again. The maids were afraid to go near her. Theodore also tried to keep Anastasia out of his sight. He remembered what the girl had been like before, and it disturbed him. Theodore thought that as soon as he returned to his own land, everything would be fine. Evan was always beside Anastasia, who was indifferent to her fate. The butler ignored the girl's condition. He was preoccupied with preparations to return to the feudal lands. Anastasia's condition was getting worse every day. She was extremely pale and vomited constantly. Theodore had no reason to inquire about his fiancée's condition. He believed that if he ignored her, it would be better for both of them. A week from departure, during a technical inspection of the wagon, Theodore was approached by his butler. Mr. Prince, according to the maid, Anastasia's condition is very poor. I confess to you that it seems to me that her condition is not due to weakness alone. At night, she is always muttering something, and her fever is not going down. And there's still a whole week's journey ahead of her. To be honest, I wouldn't want her to die on the way. Then there'd be trouble transporting her body. "When we get to the next village, show her to the doctor," Theodore ordered. Since Madam is a Southerner, it seems that she has the fever of longing. Southerners who first experienced the winter north wind often suffer from it, the healer said. Her body was weak as it was, and the disease was very advanced. She's probably been sick for a long time. There were many signs of the girl's illness, but Theodore never tried to see them. He had made this trip in the hope that their relationship would improve. Now, Theodore thought he had made the wrong decision again. Is there any way to cure it? Are there cures for this disease? Theodore asked the healer. I'm afraid there is no effective cure for this fever. The only way to deal with the ailment is to rest as much as possible, regain your strength, and wait for the disease to recede on its own, replied the doctor. Southerners tend to have a rather frail physique. Madam has been exposed to the winter wind for a long time, being completely unaccustomed to the low temperatures. Although this disease is not contagious, it is severe. Most likely the girl has already started to become delirious. Of course, I will give Mistress some vitamins, but I wouldn't count on them too much if I were you. There's a good chance that she won't be able to cope with this ailment. Theodore never wanted Anastasia dead. He only wanted to see the despair on her face, and he achieved it. It was Sergey's death that broke the girl. If Anastasia died now, Theodore would be able to start again what he had long wanted to do. But still, there was little upside to her death. Theodore realized that he wouldn't be able to forgive himself if the girl's condition continued to deteriorate. When Theodore pulled up to his residence, he was greeted by maids led by a footman. Look, let's talk to you later. There's no time for greetings now, Theodore said, grimacing like a toothache. Mr. Footman's behavior was extremely surprising. Usually, he talked to the servants, saying some kind of admonition. She's in the second wagon. She's feverish, and the doctor says it's some kind of homesickness fever. Get a healer here and have him examine her. Take the girl to the warmest room, Theodore ordered. Anastasia woke up because she was too hot. The girl's whole body ached. While Anastasia was delirious, she dreamed not only of a smiling Sergey, but also of her parents. A girl dreamed that she married a beautiful man and went to a ball with him. Anastasia also dreamed that she was once again twirling in a dance with Sergey. The girl again wanted to fall into a dream to escape from the terrible reality. Anastasia remembered how Sergey and she had chosen a name for their future child. The girl wanted to name her son in the imperial style. If it was a girl, it would be called Vega, and if it was a boy, it would be called Cedrar. In those days, Anastasia was extremely happy. She imagined their engagement and then the wedding. She even knew who would be the godparents of her children. I have noticed that her condition is not improving, shared Theodore to the secretary. Well, isn't that to our advantage? I'm talking now about Mrs. Everdene's standing in your way, Mr. Prince. There isn't a person in your entire estate who doesn't know that, said the secretary. Evan told you that? The behavior of those around him, their words, forced Theodore to rethink the actions he had committed. Yes, my lord, and I fully share his opinion, the secretary admitted. The former Theodore would surely have responded to his secretary's sentiments, but now all these outbursts and insults against Anastasia seemed disproportionate to her actions. It would be one thing if they just blamed her for Evelyn's death, but they see her as a big stain to get rid of. Theodore realized that it was entirely his fault. If it wasn't for him, Anastasia could have lived a serene life. All the horror of the mistakes he had unknowingly made began to dawn on Theodore. Perhaps I didn't put it quite right. Please forgive me. The secretary bowed low to Theodore. It's absurd. They insulted Anastasia and they're apologizing to me. Theodore's mind raced. That's all right. Forget it. As for what you said, I'm not sure it's to my advantage, mumbled Theodore. Theodore had lately often thought of those days when Anastasia's laughter came from the window. Then her face reflected not anger, but joy. Theodore remembered that he couldn't bear to see that happy smile in front of him. But what can't be said, the smile was beautiful. For some inexplicable reason, Theodore suddenly wanted to see Anastasia. It seemed to him that now he could see her as a girl, not as a descendant of Everdeen. When Theodore entered Anastasia's room, he saw that the girl was sound asleep. In front of him on the bed lay the most ordinary girl, not the harmful Everdeen who scandalized and criticized his every action. It may be strange for you to hear me say something like this, but I really don't understand why things happened the way they did. Theodore whispered quietly. Anastasia, Theodore called out. He remembered that Sergey had called the girl something else. Asya, said Theodore out loud. God, what am I doing right now? Theodore felt his entire body fill with fever. He hurried toward the exit. Please don't go! Anastasia exclaimed and fell to her knees in front of Theodore. Anastasia, what are you doing? Theodore exclaimed in surprise. Sergey, I beg you, don't go. Don't leave me here alone. Anastasia grabbed Theodore's hands pleadingly. The man realized that the girl was in delirium. Sergey, I don't want to believe that you left me. Theodore didn't know how to act in this situation. He realized that he should tell the girl that he was not Sergey. Sergey had died a long time ago and would never appear in her life again. Suddenly, Anastasia kissed Theodore gently on the lips. I wonder if she was happy that I gave in to her will and didn't push her away, Theodore thought as he kissed the girl. Theodore noticed that a smile had dawned on the girl's sweaty and blazing face. She didn't realize who was in front of her. I promise her I will never leave you, Theodore said to the girl and lifted her in his arms. He carried Anastasia to her bed. Gently placing the girl in the bed, Theodore sat down next to her. After this event, Theodore came to the girl every evening and comforted her. As spring approached, the frequency of her attacks gradually decreased, as did Theodore's visits to her room. With the arrival of spring, Anastasia was already able to walk around the mansion. Soon the doctor confirmed her full recovery. The local servants described Anastasia as remarkably mild and good-natured. This was contrary to what they had heard from the servants in the capital. One day, on one of the warm spring days, unknown persons paid a visit to the residence of the prince. I am eternally grateful to you for such a welcome, despite the unexpected visit, said the prince to the visiting Marquis Derek Hawthorne. He was a pillar of the entire aristocracy. Derek Hawthorne had influence in the eastern region and was at the very center of the political world. He was not a member of the Privy Council because of the insignificance of his family history, but he had more power than its formal members. Mr. Prince, I have not come to you alone. My second daughter, Maria, is with me. She made her debut in society this year. The Marquis presented his daughter before Theodore. It is an honor to meet you, Mr. Prince, Maria exclaimed. You own the eastern lands, if I'm not mistaken, don't you? So how did you come north? Theodore asked the Marquis. Have you by any chance heard of Viscount Russell? He's been doing some new business with Granoa lately. Unfortunately, some new infectious disease has broken out among the Granoa sailors, says the Marquis. I took a doctor with me and went there, but he was beaten to death in the harbor while gambling. For that reason, we decided to flee north. We will wait here until the new doctor arrives. Even though I realize that the disease is spreading mostly among the common people, it's still a bit unsettling. A doctor will be coming here in a few months. Would you be so kind as to shelter us under the roof of your house until he arrives? Theodore thought for a moment. It was never considered bad form for nobles to express their desire to spend the night under someone else's roof. It was not a bad thing for nobles to want to sleep under someone else's roof. And why not? The butler will show you to your room. I want to warn you not to go into the West Wing. It is not a place for guests. The West Wing of the manor housed Anastasia and Theodore's bedrooms. Theodore decided for himself that under no circumstances would he show Anastasia to these people. Mr. Prince, would you mind giving me a tour of your residence? Maria took Theodore under her arm. I don't know where the West Wing is on your estate. I'm afraid I might inconvenience you with that. If you don't mind, I wanted to join you as well, the prince said with a smile. Theodore experienced an unpleasant feeling of déjà vu. This man's face certainly didn't look much like Earl Everdeen, but his greedy eyes and mouth were an exact copy. I have heard that you too, honorable prince, have a desire to get to know us better, said the Marquis of Hawthorne. So the epidemic was a blessing to you then? Theodore asked with a grin. Theodore guessed that if he managed to build a strong relationship with these people, they would surely be a great leverage in his fight against the emperor. But would it be worth it just for revenge? Theodore continued to receive marriage proposals, even after his engagement to Anastasia. He was in no hurry to respond to them, thus neither refusing nor agreeing at the same time. The senders were satisfied with this state of affairs. Theodore knew that he was bound to marry some woman someday. Let's just go for a walk. At least show me the dining room and my room, I'd be happy with that. You know, I'd like to see the garden too, Maria exclaimed. Theodore looked at the girl carefully. She reminded him of Anastasia with her defiant behavior. It will be extremely difficult to get rid of her. Theodore thought and held out his hand to Maria. Ah, I could never have hoped that you would extend your hand to me. But don't worry, I realize it's all manners. And you are fond of teasing Mr. Prince, am I right? Maria said thoughtfully. Mr. Prince, you guessed the purpose of our visit right away, didn't you? But think about it. What kind of nobleman would run away from the disease from the east to the north, when there is the west, where it is much warmer, more beautiful, and safer? Do you mean to say that you came here in spite of everything you know? Theodore noted to himself that this girl hides a predatory nature behind her meekness. In fact, she is extremely aggressive, and she is not driven by fear, but by self-interest. Well, you could say that. Prince, do you know that this is far from our first meeting? I first saw you in the courtroom. You remember that day, don't you? That's when the prostitute you sold was convicted. Just for a moment, a look of contempt appeared on Maria's face. It plunged Theodore into the past and made him remember his attitude toward Anastasia. It was the way he had looked at his fiancée until recently. You know, Mr. Prince, I feel like if you take away my ambition, there's nothing else left. I want to succeed in life. I'm not a fan of lengthy arguments. Can you get to the point already? Theodore asked the girl. But it's common to have conversations like this before getting to the point. Isn't that the very essence of dialogue? Maria asked. I don't think we're in the right relationship to be having this kind of conversation, Theodore said in a displeased voice. Well, since you insist, let's get to the point, Maria said with a bow. Her attitude toward Theodore changed dramatically, and the carefree smile disappeared from her face. My father wants me to hold the highest position in society. However, I know very well that life without the burden of responsibility that inevitably follows a high position is much happier, Maria said in a calm, dry tone. Of course, if I wanted to, I would be the bride of the crown prince himself. Still, there are many who would like to have a bride as beautiful as me. Theodore knew that there were 2 daughters in the Hawthorne family. Since the eldest had been disowned, Mary was the de facto successor. The man who conquered her would be able to gain title and wealth. So you want to be the prince's bride? You mean me? Theodore clarified. You're absolutely right in your thinking. I decided in the courtroom that I was going to fall in love with you. I'm interested in you because, first of all, you're not interested in me at all. Secondly, I can get a high position in society with you without any responsibility. You are just the perfect partner for me. Our union will bring us only one benefit. You do realize that I will be of use to you, right? Our family may not bear a grudge against the emperor, but if it is to our advantage, we are always willing to betray him. I don't think that kind of talk is in a young girl's face, Theodore remarked. I'm certainly taking a risk by saying all this, but without risk, I can't realize my ambitions. You're failing precisely because you're trying to do the right thing. And after all, killing an emperor isn't that hard. Maria didn't understand why Theodore was inactive. If I were you, I would use the emperor's habits against himself. We all know he has a taste for alcohol and women. Perhaps you could use that in some way? You do realize that the emperor isn't a man you can get rid of so easily, right? Theodore asked. Did I say I was going to send an assassin into his bedroom? You know, diseases take more lives than poisons and knives. There's a lot of people around with all kinds of diseases, so it's not hard to infect someone with an asymptomatic disease. Doesn't that sound like a wonderful idea to you? Smiling again with a carefree smile, Maria asked. Theodore laughed out loud. This girl's words made sense. If Theodore got rid of the emperor, he could put a puppet in his place. The risks would be small, and in case of failure, he would be able to get away with it. That's quite a detailed plan you've come up with. Admit it. Do you have some sort of interest? For a simple idea, there's too much detail. I suspect someone else gave you the idea, am I right? The option to give up everything was not available to any of us from the beginning. We continue to live despite the dangers we face. I continue to live and realize as much as possible all my desires. Maria decided to evade a direct answer. Your fiancée is also getting on with her life. She doesn't have to think about the risks because she has nothing to lose. Lately, the prince didn't like it when someone started a conversation about Anastasia, so he decided to change the topic of their conversation. Since you brought it up, that means you have the right connections? Theodore asked. A lot of people want to get close to me. At the moment, I could give you two people as examples. They are the emperor's illegitimate son and his 11-year-old daughter, narrated Maria. I must warn you that the girl is quite shrewd, has considerable ambition, and may pose a threat. For that reason, I would opt for a prince who is not far off. This man is overcome by a sense of inferiority caused by the non-pure bloodline of his mother, who was murdered in his infancy. Due to the prince's humble origins, few would think of using him. So you want to take the place of the princess? Theodore asked. He saw that Maria was unequivocally showing him her desire to be useful. You might say that. To be quite precise, I want to take the place of a princess, a husband who has no political rivals. Among other things, I am extremely sympathetic to your face. A blushing Maria admitted. Looking at people like you fills me with a sense of fulfillment. That's why you'd probably be happy to go out with me. Theodore involuntarily looked toward the west wing of his mansion. It seemed to him that Anastasia was watching them, as he had once watched her and Sergey. And what, I wonder, was he staring at with that lustful gaze? Can a prince desire so much? Maria thought to herself unhappily. It seemed to her that she was overlooking something. And how long will she be here? Anastasia asked. Master said she can stay here as long as she wishes. She will be staying in the east wing, the maids reported. I can't wait to see her. The maids told me that this girl has beautiful shiny golden hair and sky-blue eyes. Anastasia thought to herself. In recent times, Anastasia stopped seeing her ghosts. They finally left the girl alone. Anastasia was afraid that if she made a mistake again, they would come back into her life. And why are you just now telling me about this girl? She's been living here for a few days, and I don't know anything about her. I don't know who she is or why she came here. Anastasia was indignant. Forgive us. We didn't think it would interest you. Let me tell you about this girl. Our guest goes out for a walk at the same time. One of the maids began to tell. She always chooses different places to walk, but you can see her from the window of your room. Luckily, they face the main alley. As Anastasia was extremely interested in seeing the girl who now lived in the prince's house, she looked out of her window every day at the same time. One day, Anastasia was lucky enough to see a blonde woman strolling through the garden. That girl looks a lot like the Snow Maiden, mumbled Anastasia. Anastasia noticed that it was still difficult for her to maintain long dialogues. If she talked for long periods of time, she began to choke for a while afterwards. The servants took care of her, keeping the room warm and giving her regular chamomile tea. Anastasia had been suffering from severe headaches for several days. The girl knew that this was a harbinger of misfortune. Thanks to everything she had experienced, she had learned to predict the misfortune that was coming to her. Mr. Prince, have you considered my proposal? Maria, who had burst into Theodore's study, exclaimed. On the first day, he regretted that he had left the matter open. I haven't decided yet. Unlike me, you have nothing to lose, so I need some time to think about it. replied Theodore to the girl. Look at my dress. How glorious it would be if I could wear it in the fall in your parts, too. Don't you think so? Asked Maria, dancing joyfully in front of Theodore. By the way, is there someone you'd like me to meet? I'd really like to see the man who gives you so much doubt. Theodore didn't want to introduce Maria to Anastasia, but he knew that eventually these girls would run into each other anyway. Good afternoon. So you are strolling within the confines of the mansion, then? That's why we've never met, even though I walk through the garden every day. Maria exclaimed when she saw Anastasia in the corridor. I don't leave the house because I don't feel well, Anastasia admitted. And what's the matter with you? Is it really a matter of illness that you can't tell the people around you? Maria took Anastasia's hand firmly in hers. What a rude girl she is. Anastasia marveled. Not being used to being insulted, it would have hurt her. I see no reason to tell you about it, Anastasia said and released her hand. Well, maybe we should have tea together then, Maria suggested. Anastasia noticed that Maria felt quite free in the prince's residence. She did not hesitate to give orders to the servants and behaved like a true mistress of the house. I've heard that you have quite a bad temper, although that could be all because you were at death's door. Tell me, do you know why I came here? Maria asked. And how would I know that? And I don't think I'm interested, Anastasia replied. Living in the prince's residence for several months now, the girl had forgotten how cruel the people around her could be. They could trample, crush, and destroy without malice. I have come here to propose to the prince, Maria exclaimed joyfully. I wondered what that girl wanted from me. That's how it turns out. In any case, the emperor has tied our fates against our will. No one even thinks we'll actually get married, Anastasia thought to herself. But think about it. Even the prince's restraining Earl Everdeen has passed away. What's the point of him getting engaged to someone who has nothing left? Besides, it would be better to be married to me than to a murderer, Maria went on to say. At first, it seemed to Anastasia that Maria was trying to piss her off by saying all these silly things. But then she realized that in this way the girl was studying her. So have you come to declare war on me? Anastasia asked. You are right. I am extremely curious. How did you manage to sway the emperor to your side? You didn't seduce him, or did you have something to do with it? Maria inquired. How dare you say that to me? Anastasia was indignant. No one had ever spoken to her in such a vulgar tone before. Oh, did I say something wrong? And now I don't even know what to do with you. Maybe I should slap you? Isn't that what you did to that girl you ended up killing? Maria asked with a sweet smile on her face. Anastasia looked at the girl in silence. She did not have the strength to contradict her. Anastasia felt as if Evelyn's ghost was standing behind her again. Maria walked up to the girl and slapped her face with the palm of her hand. You've never been treated like this before? You must have lived without a care in the world, Maria said, shaking off her hand. Her palm was sore from the blow. And why do you hate me? Anastasia asked in a surprised tone. Maria returned to her seat. She sat down comfortably on the sofa and picked up the kettle. You're right. I hate you, and I hate you very much. Because of you, I can't reach the position I want. You need to know your place, you know? I don't understand why you're here. Why can't the prince let you go? Maria said in a calm voice. Anastasia silently got up from the table and left the room. She was tired of proving to everyone that she wanted ordinary human happiness. Is this really how I'm going to spend the rest of my life? I used to think that all I needed for a normal life was bread, firewood, and clothes, Anastasia thought to herself on the way to her room. It wasn't until later that I learned that to be happy, a person needs people they feel safe around. I was always lonely. The only place I felt comfortable was in the small mansion where I lived as a child with my family. Where did you go? Suddenly, Anastasia ran into Theodore in the hallway. They hadn't seen each other in weeks. The girl noticed that Theodore was silently studying her face. She realized that it was probably because of her bruised cheek. Anastasia decided that this should please him. Since you don't have any questions for me, then I'll go. Anastasia was exhausted from the showdown with Maria, so she didn't want to talk to Theodore as well. "What's wrong with your face?" asked Theodore to Anastasia's back. The girl pretended not to understand what he was talking about. Theodore caught up with Anastasia, grabbed her arm, and turned her around to face him. "You're playing dumb, aren't you? Wouldn't it have been easier to say, 'It's nothing, don't worry'?" Theodore asked angrily, looking at the girl. "And you've never worried about me before. Why would I tell you that? And there was nothing wrong with my cheek. I just fell asleep at the table. It looks like there's a mark on my cheek. It will take a little time for the redness to go down," Anastasia exclaimed and pulled her hand out. "Don't lie to me, please. You don't expect me to believe that, do you?" Theodore asked in a calm voice. "And there's no point in me lying to you. I've told you my version of events, and you may or may not believe me. By the way, have you ever thought that our conversations with you are rather strange?" Anastasia asked. "I don't know what you're talking about right now." Theodore answered her. "I don't understand it myself, but you're not as good as me. You've never even tried to figure it out," Anastasia said with a sidelong glance. Anastasia turned away from Theodore and went to her room. Evan and the servants can't stand Anastasia, of course, but they would never dare raise a hand against a noblewoman. Only Maria could do that. Theodore guessed. "I thought I forbade you to go to the West Wing," reminded Maria Theodore. "Right, because the West Wing is inhabited by Mistress Everdeen. And yet I met with her because I found no reason not to. That is the way I was raised, and I have no intention of changing." Turning to the prince, Maria replied. Theodore noticed that there wasn't even a scratch on the girl's face. Most likely Anastasia hadn't hit her back. "I would like to point out that this castle will soon be mine, unless, of course, you refuse to accept my offer." The girl rose from her seat and walked towards Theodore. "Don't tell me you intend to take this murderer as your wife," Maria exclaimed, gently touching the prince's arm. "You shouldn't worry about that." Theodore's hands clenched involuntarily into fists. "Do you not wish to part with this woman because you have managed to love her?" Maria guessed. "Enough of these silly guesses," Theodore said irritably. "What speculation? You're the one giving me reason to think that. I'm just sharing my observations with you. If you're disgusted by what I said, then what's the problem? Everyone around you knows how disgusted you are with your fiancée. You hate her. If you had the chance, you would kill her without even blinking an eye. So why don't you do anything about it? Why did you even let her go to court? You could have just gotten rid of her and gotten away with it. You act like you're in love with this woman." "Is something wrong?" Evan, who had entered Theodore's office, asked. He was a man from a family that had served the Redfords for generations. It was hard to hide anything from him. "Please forgive me, but your face seemed so grim to me that I couldn't help but ask." Evan bowed to his master. "Just now, Maria told me that she thought it was strange that I couldn't leave that woman alone, that it's like I'm in love with her. Does it seem that way to you too?" Theodore asked. "I'll be honest with you. Lately, it seems to me that you've been treating her more gently than you should. I've also noticed that you think about her a lot," replied the butler. Theodore grimaced and froze in place. He hadn't expected his behavior to make the people around him think that he had fallen in love with his fiancée. Anastasia was afraid to go to bed. She thought that as soon as she fell asleep, she would have a nightmare. The girl decided to go outside. When Anastasia opened the door, she saw the guard. He told her that from that day on, she was not allowed to leave her room. "And why am I not allowed to leave my room?" Anastasia asked irritably. "For the moment, Mr. Prince has ordered that you not be released. He has not told us the reason for his decision." The guard explained to the girl. "I didn't expect you to honor me with a personal visit. It seems you're ready to finally give me the answer I've been waiting for. Am I right? Will you finally tell me what I've been wanting to hear from you for a long time?" Maria asked Theodore. "I accept your offer," shortly replied the prince. "We should inform the seventh prince as soon as possible. He'll be so happy about this," the girl exclaimed happily. "The Marquis of Hawthorne will surely be a great trump card for me. And Maria herself, with her cunning, could perfect my plan. I am doing the right thing. I must put all doubts aside. Theodore convinced himself. If I wasn't so high up, I could have gotten outside through the window. Anastasia had been in the room for several days now since her confinement. The guards at the door took shifts, so there was always someone outside. Anastasia guessed that it was because of Maria that she was locked in the room. Anastasia went out onto the balcony. She knew that this was the time when the girl was walking in the garden. Wow, they're walking around freely and I can't even leave my room! Anastasia saw Theodore and Maria walking. Why am I always alone? Will I meet a man who will cherish me? Bitter tears flowed down Anastasia's cheeks. It's definitely colder here than in the capital, but the northern summer is much hotter than I thought. It's time for me to prepare a lighter dress. I'm thinking of ordering some outfits from a local tailor. Maria shared her plans. By the way, His Majesty the Seventh Prince honored me with a reply 2 weeks later. Not you, dear Prince, but me, Maria boasted. So else would he have done otherwise. He only created some room for maneuvering by doing so. If his power-crazed brothers found out that he was in contact with the Emperor's rival, he'd be in trouble. Theodore explained to the girl. However, in the letter he asks for a personal meeting with you. Will you go to the capital? The prince is unlikely to come here, Maria warned. This is the time when a bunch of different stores open in the capital. You can also visit restaurants, bakeries, and various cafes. There's talk that the opera will soon be staging a production called The Boatman of Arabe. You and I should definitely see it. Maria set Theodore several conditions. First, he must dine with her at least once a week. Second, he must get rid of Anastasia and be betrothed to her. Thirdly, he must meet the seventh prince. Should I even pursue my revenge? What's the point of it? Will I be able to get rid of the feeling of emptiness by dealing with him? Anastasia thought as she looked out the window. Lately, heavy thoughts did not leave the girl. I have lost so much that even revenge accomplished will not bring me joy. It may even play against me. Ellie has talked me into running away from the prince many times. Maybe she's right after all. Maybe when I'm away from him, I'll finally find happiness. Anastasia heard a noise outside the door. The maid who entered the room told the girl that the prince was going to return to the capital. So he'll go back to the capital and I'll stay locked in my room? He'll enjoy his vacation with his new girlfriend Maria, and I'll stay here. Anastasia thought wistfully. Stand back! I need to see him right away! Anastasia exclaimed and pushed away the maid standing in the doorway. What are you doing here? Theodore wondered. I heard that you're going back to the capital. Please take me with you. It's not like I never told you I wanted to stay here. I want to go back to the capital. Don't leave me here, Anastasia asked. I can't take you with me. I myself am well aware that you didn't want to come here, but honestly, I don't care. If someone dies in the capital again, the Emperor won't be able to save you. Theodore replied, I know you are going to the capital with that woman after all. How can I look on in silence? I am your fiancé after all, Mr. Theodore. The girl hoped that at least this would allow her to return to the capital. Are you really going to leave me like this? Anastasia really wanted to return to the capital, as only there she could realize her plans. After listening to the girl, Theodore decided to take her with him. She was indeed still his fiancée, and he could not leave her in the northern residence and go to the capital with another woman. The nobles and aristocrats would not understand him. Anastasia was glad to be back in the capital again. It was here that she met Sergey, found friendship with Ellie. Every corner of the garden was her favorite. Theodore noticed that he stopped thinking about breaking the engagement with Anastasia. The girl had been extremely quiet lately, and it frightened him. I don't know what she's up to, but you can't expect anything good from her. In my opinion, it was a lot calmer when she was making a fuss the whole way, Evan admitted. I can't even imagine what that woman can pull. It's unsettling when she stops talking. Or maybe she's finally grown up and realized she's been doing something stupid all this time, Theodore asked. He had been forcing himself not to think badly of Evan lately. It annoyed him that the butler was always talking about Anastasia only in a derogatory light. Theodore arrived at the Hawthorne estate. If anyone sees me here, there will definitely be rumors of me secretly dating Maria. Theodore thought to himself. I never thought I would get to meet you under such circumstances. Theodore said to the prince and bowed low. It's good to see you here too, muttered the prince. He didn't look like royalty. The prince sat humbly shrunken in his chair. His whole body was shaking with a fine tremor. Why are you embarrassed of each other? You're relatives. Keep your communications simple, Maria said and pulled back the curtains. Easy for you to say. I've never had an uncomfortable acquaintance in my life yet. Theodore confessed to the girl. Zeno, just be yourself. You have nothing to be embarrassed about. You're always imagining things, and that's why you're nervous. It's all for naught. Maria rubbed the prince's shoulder. I thought their relationship was more of a friendship, but it seems to be much more intimate. Theodore's mind raced. Your Highness, if I, Prince Redford, share the power of my name with you, what can I expect from you in return? Theodore asked. I have nothing yet, but if you wish, I am willing to make any effort. Again the prince muttered. He made himself extremely stiff and uptight, which annoyed Theodore. What good are empty words to me? I wish for the death of the emperor, your father. That man killed my parents, my teacher, and my loyal subject. He has tried many times to kill myself as well, Theodore said in an irritated voice. I, too, wish my father dead. Bowing his head low, Zeno said. My father thinks I'm a worthless son. I have no relatives on my mother's side. I live in the house like a parasite. At the moment, my life is in danger, and I don't want to die. If there's even the slightest risk, there's no deal, Theodore warned. I'm not trying to take the throne with your help. I'm just trying to survive. If you tell me to get on my knees, I will. You want me to kiss your shoes, I'll kiss them. If I survive and am crowned, it will still be you who is the real emperor, exclaimed the prince. Having returned to the capital, Anastasia's first order of business was to go shopping. The girl decided to order a few dresses, sell them at a more expensive price, and repeat the process again. Anastasia is tired of living the same old life and decided to finally change everything. The girl decided not to return to the prince's residence, but to try to find Ellie's house. A few years ago, the maid had told her where she lived. And who are you? It wasn't Ellie who opened the door, but a little green-eyed girl. Anastasia admitted that she was an old acquaintance of Ellie's. My sister will be here in a moment, so wait for her for a while, the girl explained. She motioned for Anastasia to go into the house. Mistress, what are you doing in my house? Asked a surprised Ellie as she entered the house. You have a very sad face. Are you okay? Allie, I've saved up. I'm sick of everything. I want to drop everything and run away. But I know what it's like to live with nothing. That's why I've been saving money for a long time. I really beg you to help me. Anastasia squeezed Ellie's hands tightly. I can't live alone because I know absolutely nothing. I want to scream for help, but I don't know who to ask for help from. I really have no one else to turn to. In my whole life, I've only been treated well by you and Sergey. But he's no longer alive. Help me, I beg you! I don't want to live like this anymore! Anastasia was crying to her heart's content. I know I've come down on you like a snowball, but I just don't have any other choice. If I save up some more money, I can pay your salary for several years. Please help me. Mistress, you need to calm down now. Understand me, I am at an age where I simply need to get married. And that's why I went out today. And you're asking me to drop everything and come with you? Ellie asked. The girl needed time to weigh the pros and cons. She was an ordinary person, so she had her own desires, fears, and worries. A few months passed. A rumor began to spread around the capital that the emperor was felled by an unknown disease. Although they tried to hide it at first, a rumor leaked out that the emperor was deathly ill. The disease was slowly eating away at him. Theodore had been avoiding Anastasia all this time. He was troubled by Maria's words to him on the day of his meeting with the prince. Theodore asked Maria about her relationship with the prince. It is unlikely that they are just buddies. The girl confessed that, as a child, she often visited the royal palace to keep the princess company. By the will of fate, she met Zenon at one of these meetings. Over time, they became friends. "I love Zenon, so I don't want him to die. I want to keep him safe," Maria admitted. "I would certainly be happy if I could be near him, but I don't think I would be happy with him. But who cares? Marriage for love alone doesn't work among aristocrats anyway." "And why did you ask me that question? Are you jealous of the prince? Or is it that you don't want to let that woman go?" Maria asked. "You'd better shut up. I have great patience, but even it has a limit," Theodore exclaimed irritably and grabbed the girl by the shoulders. "So let her be your mistress. If you will betroth me and then take me as your wife, I am willing to turn a blind eye to having her by your side. You can even have children. I won't object to that either," said Maria, and took the prince's hands off her shoulders. "In return, would you be so kind as to treat me properly? And put that woman in her place. She's out of control." "I don't think you understand something. The reason I've put up with all this time has nothing to do with my friendliness or anything like that. I just simply didn't know what to do with you," Theodore admitted. "So from now on, I suggest you learn to keep your mouth shut and avoid making rash remarks." A maid came into Anastasia's room and told her that Theodore was waiting for her in his study. "Anastasia Everdeen, up until now, I've turned a blind eye to all your antics and waited for you to realize what you've done and deeply regret it. I kept hoping that you would come to your senses," Theodore said to the girl. It seemed to Theodore that if he could manage to tame the girl, if he allowed her to live quietly, he could coexist with her for the rest of his life. He did not want to part with her, but it could not be called love. "You continuously continue to disappoint me. Do you really think I'm going to put up with your antics for life? I would like to remind you that you will never carry the Redford name," Theodore went on to say. "But I am your fiancé, after all, and I was personally chosen for that role by the Emperor," Anastasia reminded. She was tired of hearing Theodore say the same thing. In 6 long years, had he never learned to treat her like a human being? "Trouble, honorable prince! His Holiness the Emperor has passed away!" Evan, who had burst into the study, shouted. Back in her room, Anastasia began to gather her things. Now that the Emperor was dead, she had to leave the estate as soon as possible. Theodore now has his hands free, and he can do with the girl as he wishes. She has no protector. "I don't understand what you mean. What do you mean she disappeared?" Theodore asked, incomprehensibly. "I went to Mistress's room this morning. I wanted to wake her up, but there was no one in the room. At first I thought she had just gone somewhere else, but her bed was quite cold," the maid said. "I looked in the garden, but she wasn't there. I even looked for her in the outhouse and in the attic. She's nowhere to be found." Theodore was sure that Anastasia would be found soon, because the girl had absolutely no savings. Without money, she wouldn't be able to get far. All her relatives were dead. No one would be able to help her. In fact, should I be looking for her? Somehow I feel like she was also waiting for the Emperor to die so she could finally be free. No one will be able to keep her by my side now. Theodore thought to himself. Not only do I have an engagement with Maria looming, but with the Emperor's death, things are only going to get more complicated. Since he died without leaving a successor, there will almost certainly be a fierce struggle for the throne. There is no doubt that if any of the powerful princes become emperor, they will control me just as their father did. I'm already tired of this endless confrontation. Maybe I should become emperor myself. In any case, I need the influence of the Hawthornes. By betrothing myself to Maria, I will gain their power. That way it will be much easier for me to mold the opinions of the disparate elites. But in that case, I need to find Anastasia to agree to break our engagement. Maybe we can still do this without her? Upon entering Anastasia's room, Theodore noticed that other than gems to sell, the girl had taken nothing else with her. On the floor, Theodore saw a lone earring lying alone. Theodore picked up the earring from the floor. He remembered that a few years ago, a girl had dropped a similar earring on the balcony of one of the estates where a ball was being held. That day, he had thought that she had wanted to commit suicide by jumping down from the balcony. I kept thinking I didn't care if she lived or not, but that night I got really scared when I thought she was going to jump. Feeling her hand throbbing in mine, I was relieved. Theodore remembered. Theodore began to realize clearly what was behind those conflicting feelings. He wanted to get rid of her, but he kept her close to him by force. He thought he wanted her dead, but deep down, he was afraid that it would actually happen. Is this feeling really called love? Theodore wondered at his own thoughts. Running out of Anastasia's room, Theodore called the butler's name loudly. Theodore ordered Evan to send a search party to find Anastasia. Of course I'm doing wrong. I should let her go. It's better for both of us, but I can't. I've got greed and selfishness in me. Even if she doesn't love me and her place isn't by my side, she has an obligation to be on my radar. Theodore decided for himself. Not far down the road, Evan found a wrecked wagon. Did she wreck the wagon on purpose to throw us off the trail? What a cunning wench. Why did she make the gentleman lose his temper? How am I supposed to report this now? Evan muttered in a sad voice. Theodore wanted to file a report against Anastasia for stealing the jewelry from him, but after checking the ledgers, he noticed that the girl had made sure they were not listed as the prince's property. The girl also managed to embezzle a small amount of money. If she sold the jewelry and spent the embezzled money modestly, she would be able to live comfortably for about 3 years. Theodore didn't know that the girl was secretly selling dresses. In the end, Theodore put Anastasia on the wanted list, but that didn't help either. It was as if the girl had vanished. That woman originally had health problems. Maybe she's already dead, Evan speculated. An irritated Theodore threw ink at the butler. For 2 years, there was no news of Anastasia. All this time, Theodore's life was gradually falling apart. There was talk in the capital of a search for her, which was bordering on insanity. Many claimed that the ungenerous wench Everdeen had managed to charm the prince after all. It was also rumored that the girl had finally managed to find true love. Here, as promised, 8 gold coins. Hugo held out the money pouch. "Come on, admit it! You embezzled a couple coins!" Ellie asked in an angry voice. "The coins may not look like much, but they're gold!" exclaimed Hugo. "I know it's gold. The bracelet was old, sure, but it couldn't have only cost 8 gold coins." Ellie continued to be indignant. Hugo tossed the girl a second bag of coins. "Now you have 13 coins, and I had to spend a lot of money on the road, too. At least give me 2 coins," Hugo asked. "What 2 coins? I paid you at the very beginning, and you decided to steal from me." The girl was indignant. "I didn't steal anything. I just took my share. I saved your life, by the way. Is that all the thanks you get?" exclaimed Hugo. "Why are you making noise again?" Anastasia looked out of the second-floor window. "Isabel, don't worry, we're just fooling around," replied Hugo to the girl. The girls met Hugo on the day of their escape. That day, Ellie's father took the girls to a large trading hub. From there, you could go anywhere in the world. There they bought a wagon and hired Hugo as coachman. It was he who suggested traveling eastward. Since Anastasia knew no one in that area, his application seemed extremely safe. Hugo suggested that the girls abandon the first wagon and move to the second. He also found them some hair dye. From that time on, Hugo was constantly by the girls' side and helped them whenever possible. "Listen, why does your sister stay home all the time? With a face like that, she could find a great man and have a much better life than she has now." Hugo asked Ellie. "It's great that Hugo's gone home. He's a little silly, but he's curious," Anastasia remarked. "You're right. I shudder every time I think he's going to figure me out. I wonder if he even believes our sister story," Ellie said with a smile. "Just act like it's true, that's all," Anastasia answered her. "That's easy for you to say, but I'm absolutely no good at lying. By the way, ma'am, I'm already so relaxed here that I even feel anxious sometimes. Don't you have that feeling?" Ellie asked excitedly. You're being a pussy, aren't you? It's been 2 whole years and you still can't trust him, Anastasia said with a smile. I can't understand why he would stay with us and help us. It seems suspicious to me. Ellie shared her fears. Hugo treats us kindly. That's more than enough for me. Plus, I like the village he's brought us to, Anastasia admitted. Unlike his older brother, who was described as a man fallen to hunting and women, the younger prince was courteous and calm. The relationship between the two brothers had been soured by the previous emperor, who favored one over the other. The previous emperor was cold to the current one, believing that the latter had done something that made his favorite son give up the throne in favor of his older brother. The current emperor sat on the throne after killing all of his brothers to save himself. He left only one Prince Redford alive because of his feelings for him. When Theodore's mother died, his father apologized to him constantly. He didn't understand what his father was apologizing for. It wasn't until years later that he realized. It turned out to be far from an accident. As he grew up, Theodore began to realize the relationship his father had with the emperor. The emperor was the man who killed his mother. He did it with Everdeen. A few years later, Theodore's father also died. The man drank poisoned wine. Theodore guessed that Everdeen had a hand in it. Theodore, mad with grief, began to rapidly increase his influence. However, the emperor had time to take notice of this. To temper his nephew's ardor, the emperor decided to find him a bride who would shackle him like a shackle. That's how Anastasia appeared in Theodore's life. He liked the girl immediately. It seemed as if someone had peeked at his preferences and created this woman based on them. But she was Everdeen, and therefore his sworn enemy. His butler entered Theodore's room and bowed low to him. Evan knew that in the 2 years that the emperor had been dead, all the other princes had been finished. Only the 7th prince, Zeno, was left alive and would later inherit the throne. No one could threaten Theodore anymore, yet he was tormented by insomnia, unable to work and fulfill his duties. If it were not for Evan and the other subjects, the prince would soon be ruined. Evan warned Theodore that Maria had come to visit him. The girl demanded that Theodore fulfill his promise to her. She was tired of waiting. Despite the fact that Theodore himself planned to do this, thanks to Maria, he managed to get rid of the emperor much faster. Also thanks to the girl, he got a puppet on the throne. In return, he had to take her as his wife. Mr. Prince, I have good news for you. We still haven't found the girl, however, we have a lead, said Evan and pulled out a small box. She sold some of the jewelry she was wearing that day. Evan opened the jewelry box. There lay a necklace and a pair of earrings. Are you sure about this? That jewelry is definitely hers? Theodore asked. He was extremely happy about this news. This jewelry said that the girl was still alive. Yes, I compared them with the papers that showed the time of their purchase. There's no doubt that the jewelry belonged to that woman. By the way, they were found on the east side of Doolittle, said Evan. Establish the exact location of the transaction and who was involved, Theodore ordered. The only reason Evan had helped search for Anastasia was because he thought that if he got on her trail, Theodore would come to his senses. Evan and Theodore's other subordinates couldn't do his job for him forever. Sir, if you do find her, what will you do with her? She's the one who ran away from you. This girl was forced upon you by the emperor. Evan tried again to get through to his master. Have you forgotten that this woman's father had a hand in the murder of your family? She's not without sin herself. Theodore walked over to his butler and grabbed him by the throat with a firm grip. It's not for you to tell me that. Not a moment has passed since that day that I haven't regretted what I did. Until now, I never doubted your loyalty, but now I'm not so sure anymore. Theodore hissed in an angry voice. I never used to hold a grudge against a dog who went too far in his attempts to serve, but it's different now. I've been thinking a lot about my attitude towards Anastasia. And do you know what I realized? The neglect of the servants and the constant pressure from you drove the girl crazy. I understood that you were satisfying your own desires by passing them off as my orders. Or am I wrong? Theodore realized that Evan wasn't the only one to blame for all of this. He felt deeply for his own mistakes as well. Theodore wanted to erase everything that had ever hurt Anastasia, even if it was about his loyal subject. Theodore finally loosened his hand. Evan fell to his knees, gulping greedily for air. Consider that I did not break your neck solely in gratitude for your hitherto unwavering loyalty. I never wish to see you again. When I return, you should be gone. Without looking at Evan, Theodore said. Theodore took a few men with him and traveled to the east side of Doolittle. Suddenly, Evan saw an embroidery piece on the counter. It showed a dragon eating a poor man. It was the embroidery that touched him. He stopped to take a closer look at it. Welcome! What is the occasion you wish to welcome us to, sir? The shopkeeper approached Theodore. That embroidery, did one of the locals make it? Theodore asked. You are in all probability curious to know the name of the man who made it, are you not? But this embroidery isn't ours. A couple of fair-haired sisters do it out of idleness. But to be honest, I doubt they're exactly who you're looking for. The girl replied, I don't think Anastasia fits that description, but there's something about that embroidery that's bugging me. Okay, first, I will visit the village that my subordinates told me about yesterday. Theodore thought to himself. He asked the girl where those blonde-haired sisters lived. It's a very tiny village in the middle of nowhere. It's not far from here, it's near the forest, the shopkeeper told me. Looks like it's going to rain soon, shouted Ellie. What makes you think that? The weather's great, isn't it? Anastasia didn't believe her. I guess you haven't learned how to predict the weather yet. It's pretty simple. Smell the laundry. It smells like rain, said Ellie and handed Anastasia a pillowcase. I don't feel anything, mumbled Anastasia. You're just not used to homemaking yet. Then the smell of water, earth, and sunshine mix together. Then there is a wonderful aroma. That's what it always smells like on the eve of rain. Anastasia wanted to help Ellie, but the girl wouldn't let her do anything around the house. Anastasia was paying her more than she was getting at the prince's residence, so she shouldn't slack off. Tomorrow is going to be a busy day. I have to go shopping, help our neighbor, and I'll also have to stop by Hugo's, Ellie said with a smile. You said you didn't like him. You lied, didn't you? Anastasia asked her. Mistress, you've got it all wrong. I just want to go to Hugo's to get some hair dye. Your roots are already growing out. A blushing Ellie replied. Ellie, tomorrow I'll go to the market myself, and you do whatever your soul desires. Anastasia was extremely grateful to the girl. Thanks to her, she had fully recovered from her illness and was able to survive these 2 years. I thought you told me you were going to stop by Hugo's to get paint, so why have you been dressing up for 2 hours already? Anastasia asked the girl. She asked for a list of groceries to buy. Getting to the market was much more exciting than Anastasia had imagined. The smell of freshly baked bread near the bakery was simply wonderful. The kind salesman even gave her a cake on the house. The bustling market reminded Anastasia of her childhood. She used to walk around the market, licking her eyes at the stalls filled with all kinds of food. Now Anastasia could buy anything she wanted. It started to rain. Anastasia hurried home. She remembered that Ellie had hung the laundry out to dry in the morning. The girl would be very upset if Anastasia didn't get it off in time and it got completely wet. Outside the house, Anastasia saw several people in black cloaks. Asya? Theodore asked, surprised. Anastasia stood silently before the prince. She did not understand how he had managed to find her after all. Asya, I found you after all, Theodore said in a quiet voice. Stay away from me, screamed the girl. Anastasia threw a basket of groceries at Theodore's feet. She needed to get out of here as soon as possible. The girl ran towards the forest. She would find Hugo and ask him to help her get abroad. Theodore quickly caught up to the girl and grabbed her by the waist. Stop it. I'm begging you to stay away from me. Anastasia tried to push Theodore away from her, but he only pulled me tighter against him. I'm not comfortable with it myself, Theodore said in a soft voice. What kind of deceitful courtesy is that? He came to take me with him, and he acts like it's all against his will. Anastasia's mind raced. Do you want to leave right now? The coachman asked Theodore. Yes, enough time wasted as it was, replied Theodore to him. The coachman bowed courteously to him. "Let me go. Why are you doing this to me?" Anastasia looked at Theodore with eyes full of tears. "I don't remember kicking you out," replied Theodore to the girl.
"Well, is that any reason to drag me back? I just hate you!"
Anastasia exclaimed. "I know that." With a smirk, Theodore whispered. He carefully placed the girl into the carriage. Theodore placed Anastasia on his lap and hugged her tightly. "You think about it. Would I be looking for you if I were willing to let you go? I want to warn you, if you suddenly decide to run away from me, or some other such thought comes into your head, this woman will not be able to count on my mercy." "Are you talking about Ellie now?" Anastasia whispered fearfully. "You have no idea what I've been through these past years," Theodore went on to say. "Why does he talk like that? Why does he act like he found something that was dear to his heart? As if he loves me? But that's impossible. I can't even think of such a thing. Selfishness must have some limit." Anastasia thought to herself. Holding Anastasia in his arms, Theodore found a long-awaited peace. He had high hopes that their relationship would improve with time. Theodore selfishly believed that he had a chance to right the wrongs of the past. He gave absolutely no thought to what the girl was feeling at the moment. He didn't even think about her own feelings. Getting out of the carriage, Anastasia looked carefully at the prince's estate. 2 years had passed, and nothing had changed in the place. The girl was afraid that as soon as she entered her room again, her hallucinations would return, and everything would be the same as before. "Mistress, are you all right?" asked the man who approached. He saw that the girl was behaving strangely. "Who is this, and why isn't Evan here? Isn't he coming out to gloat over me?" Anastasia's mind raced. "My name is Walter. The master has gone on duty. You are apparently unwell, so allow me to escort you to your room." Bowing respectfully, Walter said, "Where's Evan? Is this really the new butler? Why is he going to escort me to my room? I know where it is without him. He probably thinks I'm going to run away. But I can't do that while Ellie is in the prince's hands," thought Anastasia on the way to her room. Walter stopped at the door of some room and told the girl that she would now live here. Anastasia's worst fears were confirmed. It was Theodore's room. Soon after Anastasia's arrival, all sorts of speculations and rumors began to spread around the capital. Many people did not understand the prince's behavior. Why had he sought her out? Why did he bring her back to his house? After Anastasia had returned to the prince's estate, he had hardly left his room. "They say there is a limit to the suffering of a man. Why, then, is my life a bottomless swamp?" Anastasia thought to herself as she looked out the window. The girl noticed that he was treating her differently this time, not like before. Theodore was incredibly kind to her, as if he was trying to make it up to her. Anastasia knew that even if Theodore uttered words of apology in front of her, she would never be able to forgive him. On the contrary, she would enjoy hurting his feelings, wiping her feet on his apology. The girl never gave up trying to ruin his life. Who knows what he might have done to Ellie? If something happened to her, or will happen to her, I can't stand it. I doubt it was just a threat. If I don't obey him, he'll fulfill his words. Anastasia thought to herself wistfully. Things aren't the same now as they were 2 years ago. Now I have something to lose. Theodore walked over to Anastasia and kissed her on the top of her head. He interpreted the girl's silence quite comfortably. Theodore touched her the way a loved one would. Throughout that incredibly long night, Anastasia honestly tried to convince herself that the man embracing her was Sergey. But no matter how hard she tried, Theodore's face inevitably came through the veil of her fantasies. Although the nights were hateful to the girl, she got everything she could want from Theodore. He treated her kindly and courteously. Anastasia noticed that the house was devoid of those who had previously harassed her. What kind of a circus has this prince put on? It's been 2 whole years. Does he really think I'm a fool? Maria thought irritably. Is it so hard to give me what I ask for? I helped him kill the emperor, dealt with the princes. After all, we had a pact, didn't we? Maria exclaimed. You have no evidence binding the prince to fulfill his end of the bargain, the butler reminded the girl. What on earth are you talking about? Of course there is no evidence. How do you imagine a contract with such a content? Maria asked angrily. I don't care who he spends his nights with or what his personal life is like. I just need to become a princess. If I've kept my end of the bargain, I must have what I was promised. If I marry Zeno, the burden of responsibility will fall on me. If only it weren't for that stupid law forbidding unmarried women from being the emperor's mistresses, things would be different. Annoyed, Maria thought. The girl decided to go to the prince's estate. On the threshold of the estate, Maria was met by Walter. He did not allow the girl to enter the house. Maria had no choice but to shout profanities on the threshold of the prince's house. What's going on here? Theodore appeared on the doorstep. I apologize, Mr. Prince. I'll straighten it out right away, replied Walter to him. No need, it's not necessary. The two of us have a lot to discuss, said Theodore to the butler. How could you do this to me? I kept my promise. I'm asking you to keep yours. If a man has done you a favor, be kind enough to return the favor. I did all this just to become a princess. Maria screamed. For your sake, I killed the emperor and the people involved in his death. How is it that you treated my family so poorly for Everdene's sake? Do you really love her? And what's the big deal? Can't I love my fiancée? Asked Theodore, tilting his head to the side. Oh, is that how it turns out? And all along I thought you were only attracted to her in a slightly different way. I always thought you hated that lecherous Everdene woman. I want to warn you that you will regret this decision, Maria warned. She was determined to avenge her humiliation on Theodore.